Topeka governing body meeting will come to order. Please rise as you are able for the invocation. Blaine Moore is a lifetime Northeast Kansas resident. He served as an associate pastor at Jefferson Assembly of God in Meriden for 23 years before accepting the call to step in as lead pastor of Seaman Community Church in February. SCC is a historic Topeka church and will be celebrating its 150th anniversary in 2019. SCC meets Sunday mornings at 10:30 with other group activities throughout the week, including Lighthouse Day School, which operates Monday through Friday. Thank you.
Shall we pray? Father in heaven, we acknowledge that you are eternal and that our days are in your hands. We know that all authority in heaven and on earth is yours, and you give mankind some of that authority to rule here on earth, to make laws that are just and compassionate and help safeguard society and uphold the value of human life. We know this is the model that Christ gave us when he said that the thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy, but that he had come to give us life. And that is exactly what your Son did when he gave his life and rose again, so that any and all who look to him in faith would find forgiveness of sins. So our prayer tonight is that you would grant this body wisdom in the process of decision making that they've been called to. Give them insight and direction to steer their sphere of government to a place that blesses those who they serve, so that we all may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. I am thankful for these men and women that you have chosen to serve in these positions, so bless them in their homes and in their families. Reveal truth to them and be glorified, God, as these who bear your image strive to serve the greater good. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor Moore, even though your throat was a little sore. Okay, there's one proclamation. I'm going to come forward. Excuse me. Come on up. Everybody see you. I'm right here. Okay, whereas the entire community of Topeka can inspire and mobilize people to take action that improves our quality of life, and whereas volunteers can connect with the Topeka community by the many opportunities they have through volunteering at the Topeka Police Department bureaus, officers and their programs, as well as other local community organizations such as NAMI, Kansas and Friendly Visitor Program of Catholic Charities of Northeast Kansas. Opportunities include being involved with TPD youth projects, OK program, and Latino outreach youth programs. Volunteers in police service, Citizens Academy ambassadors, and assist with administrative duties such as the unsheltered ID card program and the front desk. Whereas individuals and communities are at the center of social change, discovering their power to make a difference. And whereas during this week all over the nation, service projects will be performed and volunteers recognized for their commitment to service. And whereas the giving of oneself in service to another empowers the giver and the recipient. And whereas experience teaches us that government cannot solve our nation's social problems. And whereas our country's volunteer force of more than 62.8 million is a great treasure, and whereas volunteers are vital to our future as a caring and productive nation and community. Now, therefore, on behalf of Mayor De La Isla of Topeka, I do hereby proclaim April 17, 13, 2019 as National Volunteer Week.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We have volunteers that work so hard, and we have community volunteers like NAMI and Catholic Charities that their volunteers work very, very hard, and we're happy to appreciate them along with ours.
Great. Thank you all. Thank all volunteers.
Thank you.
There you go. Those two are yours. Thank you. Okay, we have one presentation. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Tonight, I'd like to have our Financial Administrative Services Director, Jessica Lamandola, come forward and provide you a fourth quarter financial update, financial report.
All right, good evening. So we are going to go over the fourth quarter report. Obviously, it's a little bit later than the fourth quarter. We expect to be presenting on the year-end financials in the next month or so. So a lot of the year-end entries have been made, but we'll be discussing those in the next couple of weeks. So in terms of the presentation, it'll just be fairly high level. Do I turn the page? Yeah, just press the space bar. All right, so looking at the revenues, to start off in the general fund, 2018 ended the year about 2.4% higher than the previous year. Those are largely driven by sales tax, franchise fees, and property tax. The sales tax number, it's quite interesting to me at least that it was driven by the beginning of the year performing better than expected. That performance started to trail off towards the end of the year. And so looking into 2019, we've also started to see that trend continue. So we're not quite at a place where we want to revise our projections, but we'll be looking at that in the next couple months for 2019. Franchise fees were up due to the weather. They actually would have been higher if Westar hadn't provided as many rebates to its customers. So we're down by about $400,000 we would have expected absent the rebate. Looking at the next fund, water fees were up about 9.3%, along with wastewater a little over 9.5%, and stormwater fees up about almost 6%. All three of those reflect the 6% rate increase, with weather also contributing. Moving on to the next slide. In terms of expenses, the general fund is up about 1.8%. I mean, that's essentially flat given the overall budget growth. Looking at the water expense, that should jump out at you. It definitely jumped out at me at a 9% growth. That's largely driven by water main breaks compared to 2017. My understanding is that 2017 was a fairly low year given overall activity, and 2018 was about double what they saw in 2017. So that's what's driving the 9%. But the year-end number, we're still fairly comfortable that we'll be seeing a fairly positive year. Stormwater expenses up about 2%, and then wastewater about 3.2%. Overall commodities were up about 7%. The weather also contributed to overall expenditure growth. So the year-end summary, we expect the general fund to end positive. If you looked at the fourth quarter report, quarterly report that's up online, you can see that we're still currently expecting a surplus in that year in the general fund. So overall, the major revenues are being driven by economically sensitive revenue sources. So that should be just something to monitor as we see whether 2019 will experience ongoing economic growth or whether we should see any sort of tightening in those indicators, we would expect the overall budget for 2019 to still have that impact. And then personnel expenses continue to increase, but they're, for 2018, we're within the budgeted amount. And that is the end of the presentation, sorry. I'm open for any questions.
Any questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now proceed to the agenda and start with roll call.
Deputy Mayor Clear.
Here.
Council members Hiller. Here. Ortiz.
Here.
Emerson.
Here.
Padilla.
Here.
Jensen.
Present.
Mays.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
And Lester.
Here.
City Manager, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Yes, Deputy Mayor. Tonight, we expect to conduct one executive session, time permitting. We also request staff to add a resolution granting Valeria Mara a noise exception on April 13th to the consent agenda. And then also a request that we move the non-action items prior to the action items. So go down the agenda as it's printed until we get to action items and then switch over to the non-action items instead. Allow us to get through those in order to be able to allow the mayor to arrive and be able to participate in the discussion on the action items.
Any questions? Everybody approved? Yes?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So how will we know when time allows us, City Manager? Because our meeting's over at 10. Are you saying before 10, or are you going to check with us to extend?
Yes, ma'am. Basically, what I'm looking at is if we can get it, if we have a half hour at the end, if we're done at 9:30, that will allow us enough time to conduct the executive session.
Thank you.
All right, we will proceed then with the appointments.
A is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Mark White to the Board of Mechanical Examiners for a term ending December 31, 2020. B is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Mary Powell to the Topeka Sustainability Advisory Board for a term ending February 28, 2021.
Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve. I'll second. Oh, I'm sorry.
So Councilman Lesser moves to approve. Councilmember Jensen seconds. All in favor, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no.
Okay, we have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the appointments are approved. We'll now proceed to the consent agenda.
A is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sylvia Ortiz granting Yvonne Duncan an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. B is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller granting the Celtic Fox an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibition. C are minutes of the regular meeting of April 2, 2019. There's a list of applications before you. Staff is recommending approval. And E is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sandra Clear granting Valeria Maria an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions.
Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Councilmember Anderson. Councilmember Ortiz seconds. All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, vote no.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the consent agenda is approved. Now we will move to the non-action items.
We do not?
Nope.
We'll now proceed to non-action items, beginning with A. 6A. If the clerk would read.
A is discussion on the common economic development tools used in Kansas.
Are there any questions or discussion from the council?
If I could.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Deputy Mayor, what we're looking at here is we included the presentation that Deputy Manager Gerber went through at the last work session that we had. From that, there were a few questions that I had that I was hoping to be able to have a discussion on in order to be able to move that forward. And with the items that we have coming, the ability to schedule another work session wasn't really present. And this is really a general discussion that I like to have regarding the use of these types of incentives, ask you some questions to hopefully guide us as we conduct our meetings with the different people that the developers that we meet with. By no means is this the, where the discussion needs to go necessarily, but I throw these questions out with the purpose of hopefully having, receiving some insight. You got a couple more slides? And Deputy Manager has a couple more slides that he didn't get through at the last presentation. So, so what we do is I'll let Doug finish his 4 slides, and then we'll go into my questions.
Okay.
Governing body, good evening. The presentation that we started last time is included in your packet, and obviously last time we went through in about 45 minutes, we talked about IRBs, we talked about CIDs, community improvement districts, we talked about TIFs, tax increment financing, went through examples and questions on all 3 of those particular tools that we have in our tool belt to use for economic development. Now I have a couple more slides, as the city manager mentioned, to talk about some more unusual tools that don't often get used, but still they're a part of the arsenal that we have. And so if you turn to page 22 of your slides, those are on there. I'll start with TDD, Transportation Development District. This is, as I stated, a fairly unique tool. I think in my 20-year career, I've used this one time. And as we go through some of the requirements, I think you'll see why it's a bit of a unique tool. But essentially, this is an oversimplification, but it's a CID for transportation. So it can consist of a special assessment, but it can also consist of a new transportation sales tax to be used for transportation-related infrastructure in a particular district. Just like a CID, it's effective for up to 22 years, can go up to 1%. It's typically used in new developments, particularly new retail developments, and that's why it's a bit of a unique animal, because many of the ones we're dealing right now are renovations or rehabs, but it can be typically used in new retail development. One of the reasons it is a bit unique also is that it requires a petition of 100% of the property owners to move forward with something, which is different than our typical special assessment where you only have to have 50% plus 1. So 100% is a fairly high bar, obviously, and so again, you typically see it with a single property owner or a new development where they've agreed to something like this ahead of time. I know in my career we used it for a couple of restaurants that were coming in, and we used it to help construct a new road, a frontage road to lead to those restaurants. Not here in Topeka, but in my previous iterations. So the petition establishes a funding source after you get that, and then you have sort of the notice and public hearing process like you would for a CID. If you're using a new tax levy, if you're using special assessments, then the requirement is less rigorous. This next slide is essentially a laundry list of the things that are available to be funded by TDDs. And you can see, as promised, they're mostly, in fact, all transportation related, except for the one that kind of stands out there is utilities in or out of the public right of way. You can use TDDs for that. And as I think about these in Topeka, obviously, if we had a new retail development coming in, that could be a possibility. I also think about a place like Heartland Park that is perhaps looking for, not suggesting that we do that, but that would be an example where you'd have a single source property owner who may or may not have some transportation related needs. So those would be some examples possibly where it could be used in Topeka. I'll stop there and see if you have any particular questions about that tool.
Any questions for Deputy City Manager? Councilmember Hiller?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I guess when I see that 100% of people have to sign on, why would you do that if you could do the same thing with a SID, or if you were gonna have a benefit district, special assessments? You can do that without a TDD, right?
You could, Councilwoman Hiller and Deputy Mayor, I think, I'm not sure I can give you a great answer to that
That's
because,
probably why it doesn't get used much, but I'm just trying to.
because as noted, it is a typically developer-driven process, as with all of our tools. And it could be as simple as they feel comfortable with their facilities, but they want some infrastructure related to transportation, and that's a good way to fund it.
Okay.
That's speculation on my part, though.
Okay, Councilmember Emerson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Gerber, when you say transportation, is it even off-site transportation? Is that the difference between this and like a SID?
Councilman Emerson, when you say off-site transportation,
For instance, again, using
Like
Harlan
transit?
Park as it, for instance, could they put a highway exit in if they wanted to or something like that with this kind of, I mean, is that the thing, this allows you to do some things that a SID won't off-site?
that's a specific enough question, I can't answer that off the top of my head. It can do things, I think I listed it up there, it can relate to, well, I didn't list it, but it can be used for transit. But in terms of off-site related, I think it has to be within the district, but I'm not entirely sure.
Anything. And I guess my confusion is, aren't a lot of those things also SID items? So I guess I'm trying to figure out what this allows you to do that a SID doesn't. Maybe other than that one example, you can use it for transit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another tool that developers sometimes request, although not very often. For a city, one of the advantages is that it doesn't count to your bonded indebtedness, which some of the other tools don't either, but that is
Yeah.
a potential advantage for us.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Councilmember Ortiz?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I mean, because that's what I was looking for, transportation. When I see this, I think vehicle or trains or planes or automobiles or buses. And all this is crazy to me, especially like you're saying that, well, they're putting in a new road, because I'm surprised they didn't use this when we had Target and Home Depot out there, when nothing was out there. What, I mean, I don't understand why it's not being used.
Councilwoman Ortiz, I can't speculate on why it wasn't used at that particular time. Again, maybe it just wasn't a tool that was familiar to folks in Topeka. If you refer back to the memo I sent out a couple weeks ago, a number of those projects in the Johnson County metro area have TDDs associated with them,
Right?
but I can't speculate as to why it wasn't used here.
Can they, if I may, can they come back now and, or since they're developed, there's no way they could come back for transportation or anything like that, like the Mars or anything like that? Since they're already built, could they come back and try to use it, or?
Councilwoman Ortiz, I mean, theoretically, a developer could come and ask the body to establish a district for the funds to be used for that purpose, yes.
Because the
Short answer,
number
yes.
one thing that I hear, and I constantly hear with Mars and Home Depot and Target is and Bimbo, there's no transportation out there. It's hard to get out there. The jobs are there, but it's just hard to get out there. And the hours that Mars keeps, it's really crazy. So that's why I'm asking. Thank you.
Councilmember Hiller?
Well, I was thinking that this is a SID style in that it's sales tax driven, correct? So you have to have retail to be able to use a sales tax.
Correct.
So if it's factories, they don't have the retail on it. You could use this for a parking garage then, if it was like a public one that you charged for.
Councilwoman Heller, that's correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Do you want to continue?
Last slide. I think many of us in Topeka and on this body are familiar with what star bonds are, having gone through quite a discussion about star bonds a couple of years ago. But essentially, they're a TIF writ large. They're a TIF on steroids. They're at least used to be. Mr. Johnson can probably correct me. They used to be under the TIF statute. I'm not sure if that's the case any longer still. But there have been some changes over the last couple of years. But the benefit of a star bond district is the STAR stands for, I just blanked, but it's basically the state sales tax. So what you get, the advantage you get from a star bond district is you collect the state's portion of the sales tax. So that's obviously when we were talking about Heartland Park several years ago, we calculated it was about a 16-to-1 ratio. In other words, the state would have been contributing $16 to every dollar of city sales tax. So if you do it in the right place and there's a significant driver, it can add up very quickly. But you can see that it's a fairly high threshold to meet when you're trying to establish this kind of district. You need a project with at least $50 million in capital investment. And then there's just a number of other thresholds that need to be met. The process is similar to what you go through in establishment of a TIF district, plus there's the additional step of requirement of Department of Commerce approval. Not only do you need to talk to them on the front end, but you also have to talk to them on the back end of the project. So that makes them a not often used tool because of the size and qualifications that they have to meet. So with that, went through both of those relatively quickly, had questions in here. City manager has questions for you, and I would turn it over to him unless there's specific questions about star bonds.
Questions? City manager?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Well, the first question I'd like to ask is, currently our requirements state that a project will not be supported with public incentives at more than 20% of the project costs. That's a maximum amount of participation that's been established for our projects. And so I guess the first question I would ask is that an appropriate percentage to keep is still a maximum threshold? I've seen various numbers. Each city has a little bit different setup, but that's what we've had for a long time. And we look at that also, if you look at the project that we're looking at 29th and Wanamaker with the Sherwood Crossing, we're looking at that at both the TIF incentive and also the CID incentive being a maximum of 20% of the project. And so for my first question is that the appropriate percentage? Obviously, negotiations can make a difference as to how much that percentage is, but it's nice for us to know what we're looking at for a threshold. And any guidance that you can give helps us as we do those negotiations. So that's my first question.
What do other cities, what do they have? What percent? Do you know?
I don't know Kansas as well. I know in Iowa we were at 10% max. But we also had a shorter time frame that we could utilize for TIF money. So we were typically looking at a 10-year time frame, and so we were at 10%. We didn't typically go 20 years with TIF. We had the ability to, but it was typically 10-year amount. So I could ask, Deputy Manager could give you more insight relative to that based on what he's seen around the state. But 20% is what we're currently at.
Deputy Manager, do you know?
I can't give you a very specific answer except to say that our TIF policy was just crafted using input from a lot of other cities, particularly looking east towards the metro area, and the 20% number was arrived at because of the thresholds that were contained in other policies from other cities, particularly Lenexa was a good guide for us.
Like how long ago did you say that was?
a year and a half ago.
Year and a half. Any questions?
No, you're good.
Councilmember Hiller?
Well, I'll bite there. It would be interesting if you're having that question to look around. I know that the applications that we're looking at right now are doing, there's some purchase money in one of them, but otherwise they're doing pretty much all their development with the incentive money. And that's okay, maybe. But if these are just supposed to be incentives, you know, we want to incentivize certainly, but not over incentivize. If 10% in 10 years works well, for instance, we didn't talk about it at all when we worked on the policy, but I'm open to that. I know that a couple years ago, we took our neighborhood revitalization program and discovered that it was the sweetest one in the whole country, that we were kind of giving away the store, and we dialed it back and have found that it's still very attractive to those who are following it. We still wanted to promote it more, but it was sweeter than it needed to be. So,
City Manager?
Councilman Hiller, what I would say too that makes this different is the but-for test. Because of us having that, we look at the incentive as it matches to the project, and really looking at the but-for can take us partly to the decision-making relative to how much of a percent of the project we would be. So I think we take that into consideration as we go forward as well. So even if you set an arbitrary amount of, say, 20% as the highest, we'd look at what's the percentage that's necessary to make the project happen, and analyze that as well, and have that analysis done by our financial advisor.
Any other input? Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you. I'm generally happy with 20% as a rule of thumb. I wouldn't want to make that a hard and fast rule, because if you look at some things like our food deserts where it may be necessary to do more than 20% in order to attract a realistic grocery store option to that particular area, I wouldn't want to handcuff us from that. But at the same time, recognizing that the but-for test that we have, as well as that the majority of these incentives are performance driven. So if the merchant doesn't perform, then they get 0%. So at the end of the day, I think 20% is a good rule of thumb. I'm always open to improving that in either direction if there's a good reason to do so, but that seems to work well for us in the past, if that helps.
Yes.
Other input? Can it fluctuate depending, so we could,
Yes.
and who decides?
We look at what's
look
being
at-
proposed, and then through the analysis that we do, determine what is appropriate in negotiation with the developer to make the decision as to what the incentive will be and what the percentage of the project it will be.
So then why are you asking us about the 20%?
Well, because...
If it's already,
Right. The reason I would say that we're doing that, Deputy Mayor, is we want to make sure that we're negotiating with knowing what the preference of the governing body would be, because I wouldn't want to bring something forward that is 25 or 30% of the project if it's going to fail. Why would I even negotiate in that way with the developer?
right,
And
okay.
so that we know what the typical threshold would be. If we're determined that it is a project that's worthwhile, such as a grocery store in a neighborhood, and we wanted to make it an extra special amount, that would all, that ultimately would be decided if that was what was necessary in order to make the project happen. We would then present it to you. And I think that's one of the things is Deputy Manager Gerber put out, that we're looking at having a pre-discussion on some of these items before the hearing happens. That will give us an opportunity to present that to you. So if it was something that was above 20%, we would be able to lay out the reasons, why-fors, and even allow the developer to explain why it needs to be the type of incentive amount that it is, in order to be able to have a good discussion about whether it's an appropriate amount for the project.
Understand. Any other input? Councilmember Emerson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Tratt, I guess my question would be, how often does our maximum, the 20%, in other words, become kind of the de facto what everyone asks for? Is that what it ends up almost every time being?
I would say, Deputy Manager, correct me, but I think that oftentimes it does end up being that, and that is a concern. But I think that's where we need to make sure that we're doing good financial analysis of the project, the expenses that they're doing, the types of usage of the money that they intend to use in order to help us to figure out whether that's really appropriate.
And if I may.
Yes.
And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not certain, so I'll ask it because probably other people have the same question. Is it when we have a TIF and a SID layered on top of each other, together they can't be more than 20% of the project, or each can be up to 20?
As we've gone into the negotiations with that project on 29th and Wanamaker, that's what we've been utilizing. Correct. I'll let him.
Councilman Emerson, 20% total. Our SID policy is actually silent on that, but as we do our analysis and as we have conversations with the developer, our request to them is that our direction to them is that we're not going to be going above that threshold, and oftentimes it ends up being below that threshold. But I will put a caveat on that and say that's oftentimes where some of the more robust discussion comes when we're talking with developers as to how those numbers are calculated. Because I think we all know you can massage the numbers so that costs are hidden or that they're calculated a different way or calculated using different values. And so that's oftentimes a sticking point in our discussions.
And one just last quick follow-up. And what do we do if, for instance, if they go and layer, I know we've done some projects where we gave them a SID and a TIF, and then they went to the county and got industrial revenue bonds issued. And how does that then play into it?
Councilman Emerson, all of those costs are included in the analysis that we have our financial advisor perform. But again, I'll add a caveat, unless those are done sort of after the fact, which potentially could happen. But in the two most recent ones that have had both a SID IRB or TIF SID IRB, those costs were all calculated into the analysis.
Thank you.
Any other input? Councilmember Hiller?
On the lines of that question, don't our applications, at least one of them, I've been trying to read them, but I may confuse them, require that the developer disclose all of their incentives, all of the sources and uses, I guess you call it?
Councilwoman Hiller, that's correct, yes.
Okay, so they should, and if somehow they didn't, and then they turned around and went after something in short order anyway, that could jeopardize their arrangement with us.
Yes, we would need to go back to the drawing board. We're having that conversation with the developer right now. They've applied for a certain set of incentives. It's been brought up regarding an IRB to be used for the sales tax exemption in construction. But again, that would have to be factored into the overall analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? Yes, Councilmember Ortiz.
Doug, when the district is, who draws up the district? Does a developer bring it to you? Or is that something that how do we come up with the district when we do the TIF and the STAR bonds and all these? Because I've noticed some districts are big, some are small. There was a district that even left out a Walmart. I'm like, really? I mean, come on, who does this?
Councilwoman Ortiz, as with most of these tools, these are developer-driven processes, and we would typically require them to submit a map and a legal description of what the district will look like. Sometimes that becomes a point of discussion, other times it doesn't. If you think back, for example, to the Wheatfield conversation, when that TIF district was drawn, you'll recall that it extended east across Fairlawn, and there was some conversation about whether or not that was appropriate. That was their initial request, and ultimately the body agreed that that was appropriate, but there's certainly room for that conversation. Ultimately, it's up to this body to accept or reject anything that gets presented to them, but typically it's presented by the developer.
Well, some of the businesses opted out.
At least one, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we will move to the next item.
No, I got a few more questions if we have time.
I keep missing you.
From that, it's a good segue, Councilwoman Ortiz's question. The other thing the next one I wanted to ask is, we're looking at the possibility of creating some TIF districts for areas of the community where we would like to see development happen. We've talked about White Lakes before publicly. We've talked about a couple other areas that might be potential locations to create TIF districts with the intent that stating those are areas we would like to see development. And so my question goes to, do you support this plan, this idea of us creating TIF districts, even though we have no specific project that would be considered for that particular area? And any guidance that you would want to provide relative to where those districts might be created?
Councilmember Jensen.
So I generally do support that as a mechanism to incentivize certain areas of the community that need development. Given the statute generally is developer-driven as opposed to city-driven, could you give us like a quick high-level overview of how you would foresee that working, or has that been fleshed out yet?
Sure. The way I would foresee it working is we would identify those areas that we consider to be blighted, that have clear indications of need for some type of incentive, some type of push of developer. As Doug has been looking at the project for downtown, we're looking at the pre-1992 enterprise zone areas being areas that we should be looking at potentially as locations that we would create a TIF district. I think that we can determine that most of those probably still could use some development to occur. The law allows us to be able to go and do that, and so that's an advantage for us. We don't have to declare blight. We don't have to study that, or the issue of a conservation zone, proving those two factors, either one of those factors exist. And so for us, it's really trying to determine the parts of the community where we feel there is blight or opportunity because of the pre-1992 enterprise zone, where we could start setting up the process, go through the process of creating the TIF district, having that completed so that if someone was interested, all they'd need to do is bring to us a TIF plan for the redevelopment that they would like to do in that particular area.
If I could do a follow-up on that?
Yes.
So I think this is fantastic. So within a given area that we have a proactive TIF district set up, is it then driven by zoning? I mean, if somebody has a residence in that district, they can't obviously come and apply for TIF funds for that because it's generally commercial, is that correct?
Yes, generally it's commercial. Yes, commercial, retail, could be industrial. But for us, we would likely establish those over our retail and commercial areas that we would like to see redeveloped.
Excellent.
That are decaying, that have empty buildings, that kind of thing, that hopefully then would gain the interest of a developer, knowing that the district already exists and that we've said we want development, which then lets them know that there's an interest already in that particular area, and that if they come in with a good plan, that we've already said we want to see redevelopment occur, rather than debating whether this is a good spot to redevelop.
And you can have all that ready for next week? That's fantastic. That's a joke, people.
But I will tell you that Deputy Manager Gerber is already working on designating those, figuring out where those areas might be, and determining what those locations would be for the future to bring those forward to you. We're fortunately, in the situation of currently doing proposals that are presented to us, and so our efforts are being spent there. But once we get through this series of current applications, then we could look at starting to go forward with creating those new TIF areas where we want to see development occur.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilmember Ortiz.
And how do we handle properties, big properties that are in bankruptcy?
I'm not sure
I mean,
Deputy Manager
like
Gerber would
White
want
Lakes
to
was
apply,
at
but
one
for me,
time.
I would look at the fact that most of those, if they're in bankruptcy, eventually have opportunities to be cleared based on the court actions that occur. You have to be patient, though, sometimes for those to get cleared through the system in order to become owned by someone else that is potentially seeking a redevelopment of that particular area.
City manager, I've been patient for 15 years.
Sorry, ma'am.
15 years.
We'll try and make things happen.
And there's a lot in my district. And let's talk about, I still call it Deer Creek, down there at 6th and Deer Creek. And that, Doug, if you would look into that for me, and I'll try to find my notes on that. That was bought with some HUD finance money, so that's why we can't even get that property. We've had buyers in there. It's some kind of state, something that Lindenmuth did. It's some kind of state thing that we can't, or he's holding on to the taxes. I'll try to find my notes. But I've had several people. Reese's is one that's wanted to come and clear that, build a store, build different things, and we can't touch it. So I've been patiently waiting, but there's a lot of areas out there that he owns still that's still tied up.
Understood.
Anyone else? Councilmember Keller.
Well, I'll speak on the other side of it a little bit. I guess in the case of downtown, you've got an organization that's actively marketing it, that wants to develop it, that's putting the effort into it. We, on the other hand, as the city, have with our citizens, I mean, together, city and county citizens have created an economic development engine, JADO, and we contract with Topeka to do economic development for us. And so I'm not inclined to, I mean, we look at how disappointed people are when they discover that a district that even was petitioned for by a developer doesn't advance. And I'm just not sure what the overall, maybe I just need more conversation, the benefit of us spending all the bureaucratic time, if you will, just creating a TIF district, which is, of course, a certain model of how one would develop as well, when maybe it's not going to develop for a long time, or if there's nobody actively promoting that area. To me, we're kind of getting our teeth cut on this cycle of getting the council briefed up on TIF and SID and all of the models, and we're also getting kind of going through some bumps, but looking at what sort of procedures and timeframes we should do as a rule, so that when somebody does apply, it's realistic, we're ready to go before we set things, and then they go smoothly. Which I think absolutely is our role no matter what. But if we're open for business and can demonstrate that we're supportive, and then let the private market do its thing in terms of people developing, and certainly encourage through our neighborhoods. And I think I've said this before, I really would like to see some element of our JADO funds and our economic development work help neighborhoods that want to redevelop their retail, help people learn how to rebuild a strip mall or whatever, and how to market to try and get somebody in there. To me, that's a better investment of our time, and also to let the economic development people do it. And I'm not saying, I mean, in the case of downtown, and maybe the ones that people are thinking of in Johnson County, where there was somebody actively out trying to develop that particular parcel, is soliciting businesses ready to go, that's different than just kind of build it and hope for, designate it and hope for the best, to me. Sometimes when small businesses develop, also, they're not ready for all that razzmatazz, and we're trying to really develop entrepreneurs and smaller businesses. And what we see in our neighborhood sometimes is that people don't take advantage of the programs, and sometimes maybe that's because they're so, well, I know it, in a number of cases, they're involved enough, and you've got to disclose all your finances and go through a pretty high-end structure to actually take advantage of that, and not everybody's ready to do that. So those are just some thoughts. Thank you.
One of the comments I would have related to that, if someone wasn't wanting to take advantage, they wouldn't need to submit a plan. They could come in and go ahead and do their development without making an application for the TIF. Mm-hmm. So therefore, those that were not interested in going through the process or didn't fit the type of project that would be able to take advantage of it, they would just not apply for their plan, for the TIF plan, and just do their development without it.
Well, I appreciate the feedback again. It's just a conversation.
Councilmember Lester.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I wasn't quite tracking on that, to be quite honest with you, but I fully support this. I think this makes, we've talked about this in the past, and I think it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. We're kind of able to establish areas that we've done due diligence prior to the developer coming in, and it's a little bit, it's kind of a little bit, an easy way to compare would be, we're putting a sign in the yard saying open for business for sale, and what it does is it also opens up to other developers who are looking for these type of projects that aren't necessarily sending site people to Topeka to look to see if they can develop something. They see that's available. I would assume there would be, we would market this when we do it. So it's going to open up a whole, it's kind of like putting a for sale sign versus having a property for sale but not telling anybody about it. So I think it does give us the opportunity to expand while at the same time continuing to look at other developers that come to us with their project. And I think it can breed competition between, ideally it would be two developers that see the project and maybe that creates a better deal for us. So I think it definitely, my opinion is it definitely makes sense to do that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cohen?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think we had a similar conversation back when we put the TIF over there at 29th and Fairlawn about, when are you going to work on the second half of the project, or when is it all going to get completed? With the hotel going in the back, and I don't know if you guys have driven by there lately, but there's sticks going up back there, and I think we know the developers that we can work with, and I think we would also do our due diligence for somebody mystery company that comes in from out of town wanting to do something. So anyway, I just encourage you guys to drive by there and take a look and see what a really good corner looks like. I think I brought this idea up at one of our work sessions. It's like we need to be more leaders and direct. This is a location that I think that we need to see development, and I think that this is a really good direction for our city. We learned over in Kansas City or Overland Park, they do vast districts, like large areas of land, like the equivalent from the Expo Center south to the highway, to the turnpike. So, I think when we go in and we identify those areas, I think we do need to be bold and maybe not just singularly pick projects, but maybe identify maybe a larger area to go after. So, thanks.
Councilmember Mays?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll just piggyback on top of those comments. I think this is actually a really good way for us to sort of decide what our vision for Topeka is, and then take steps to implement it without waiting for people to come and tell us what their vision is. I think it's a proactive approach, and up until now we've had, I feel like, a fairly reactive approach to economic development. And I think this is something where we could, as you guys said, decide that there are areas in need of specific things, and then hand it over to the economic development folks over at the GTP and let them, take it from there once the policy is in place. So I fully support it.
City Manager?
Well, thank you. I think, the only other question that I have that's an odd one is, I found out here, and as we had in Iowa, there was an opportunity that you could utilize TIF for housing. It's pretty a rare thing. I don't know that it happens very often, but it is something that is a possible thing to do. Housing TIFs are a little harder to manage because typically when you do a commercial TIF, the building goes up and the value is created. With housing, it takes a while to get each of these lots developed, and unless they're building them 20 at a time, it takes a while to do a housing TIF. But I'm curious as to your thought as to whether or not you would be supportive if we were to look at a housing TIF for our community, or if that seems too foreign of an idea to pursue.
Councilmember Emerson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Trout, can you expand on that? Are you saying that it would, say you have the bare lot there, that's what the tax would be set at? I mean, the
Right, you would
property
take,
tax?
you would go into a bare area, and it would be developed, and your base would be your property value that you have without any homes built on it, and then you would begin to grow that increment as each home was built on the property. And they would be able to use it for the same functions that that you would have available for TIF.
You said as each home is built on the property, so this is like for a whole subdivision?
Right, you would do a subdivision plat, and that subdivision would then be, the TIF district would then be the plat of that subdivision, and then as homes were built, that would create an increment, and they could then capture the taxes that are paid as you would any TIF on a commercial property, and then that would then be able to be used by the home developer that's there, that's doing that property.
I need to think about that. Thank you.
That's fine.
Councilmember Jensen?
So is that usable for redevelopment in neighborhoods? You know, say you have an older neighborhood that's distressed, could that be leveraged to help spur redevelopment of those existing homes?
Deputy Mayor and Councilman Jensen, it would be subject to the same requirements as a typical retail or commercial TIF. In other words, it would have to meet one of the 7 or 8 or 9 thresholds in the statutes by which you can designate an area for TIF.
Sure.
Again, typically those would be blight or conservation area.
Right. Well, and that's what I'm thinking, is our neighborhoods that need something, some kind of oomph to get them going, this might be an ideal tool to help those folks out.
Councilmember Padilla?
Could you give us an example, city manager, maybe where this has been used, like you suggest?
I cannot.
Okay.
It's
If I
in
may.
the statute, but
Yeah.
it isn't used often, so I was just curious. I mean, we do have developers that are out there and about that are doing our housing development, and so thought that I would ask the question rather than get us in a position of, if we happen to have someone come. But it's a novel idea.
Deputy Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
As a follow-up, I would support something like that. I think Councilman Cohen said it when he said "be bold." I think the ideas that you're presenting require some boldness on our part, and I like the idea of us having some direct hand in how things are developed in our community, either with commercial or housing efforts, rather than, as Councilman May said, being reactive. I like being able to drive a little bit where that development is going to be in our community. So I'm supportive of both things that you've been talking about.
Councilmember Lester?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Would this be a possibility, or have you done any looking at Lawrence Bay, the Lawrence Bay area in regards to this?
It is something that we've been thinking about, yes. And it is something that we realize there's infrastructure that needs to be there, which oftentimes infrastructure are some of the things that, are the things that we could utilize. And so for us, it is something that we would consider in that particular part.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mays?
Thank you. I'm curious, don't we have a neighborhood revitalization plan that is more or less the same thing as this? Would this be just broadened to not be in intensive care neighborhoods, or, I mean, how is it different?
Go ahead. I'm not sure. I'm thinking, I don't know these rules as well.
I see Mr. Finder out there, and he could speak much better to the neighborhood revitalization plan.
Director Finder, would you help us out here a little bit?
I don't mean to cause a fuss.
Sure you
It's
did.
good question.
So if I heard correctly, the neighborhood revitalization plan that we have, you were wondering if that is targeted, or? to the intensive care areas.
I guess my question is, how is this different? I mean, isn't the neighborhood revitalization plan more or less a TIF on a single property for
Yes.
like 10 years or so, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, you couldn't use both because it's the same money, if you will. It's the increment that you're creating in that new tax value. So you can choose one or the other. So you're correct in that regard. When we use our NRP to target the areas that are most in need, the at-risk and intensive care. So it's if there's a TIF overlaid in the NRP area, then a developer, the property owner has a choice to use whichever one benefits them and for the most.
And if I may. So, but a TIF wouldn't need to be necessarily designated to an at-risk neighborhood. Is that?
It would have to meet the
Correct.
requirements that Deputy Manager mentioned in order to create it. So you would have to make sure that it meets those requirements, whereas NRP has already been determined to meet those requirements. And Director Finder, wouldn't it be true, the NRP is a 10-year rebate, correct?
That is right.
And versus a TIF would be a 20-year rebate. So you would have an advantage of additional 10 years of collection.
But a TIF does not have to be 20 years, though.
You're right. Could be restricted.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hiller?
Clarification, though, if I could. Okay, is it, just stay here for a second, this one's maybe for you, but isn't a TIF limited to infrastructure, and would that include building the house, or is that just getting the utilities in there?
Councilwoman Hiller, we haven't fully flushed out the concept. I think the manager just tonight wanted to introduce the idea and see if there's general support, and if that were the case, then we would really dig into it and see, bring you back something that's a little more polished. Right now, it's just way at the idea concept.
I do agree with Councilman Mays that there would be a redundancy if in fact they're the same. I would touch a little bit on what I said before. I think it's really good that we're having this discussion in terms of my colleagues being interested in the proactive TIF districts for commercial. But if marketing is really what we need to do, we've talked about doing it for NRP and haven't, and sure enough, it's still just sort of yawning along. I do see this idea if it as a way to proactively target, we have in our long-range land use plan to try and promote infill and promote redeveloping the existing core, not necessarily limited to low-income neighborhoods, so it could be a strategy in that way to promote infill, correct? Because it wouldn't have to be a subdivision. With your idea, it could be just some lots identified in a whole neighborhood or...
Correct.
Okay, it's interesting.
Okay, Councilmember Jensen?
So to sum it all up, I'm all for anything and everything we can do to increase the population density of the city without making it physically larger.
Understood.
City Manager.
One more simple one, and then we can move on. Honestly, this is, I think when we look at projects that we do, oftentimes we've dealt with it in the past. And they did with the Academy Sports project, and that was that we didn't want to incentivize moving a business from one part of the community to the other part of the community. And so, and I think I know the answer, but rather than assume, I'd ask that question, is that also true as to how you would look at the creation of a CID, that you would not want to move one business across and provide incentives for that?
Councilmember Jensen?
So I generally support that, with the exception of where we're going to lose the business anyway.
Okay.
If where they're located is in such bad shape that they're going to close up shop and we're going to lose those jobs in our community, I would much rather have it move across town than move completely out. Also, if they're going to open up a second location, totally fine with that too.
Councilmember Lesser?
Thank you. Yeah, City Manager, on the CIDs, I'm going to take a really hard look on what new the development would be bringing to us, to the city. especially because, you know, a lot of those, in regards to CIDs versus TIF, don't have the infrastructure compared to the TIF. So, yeah, that's, you know, we have one coming up we're getting ready to discuss, quite frankly, and in a good part of town that in situations like that, or like this, like that, one that's coming up is, it's going to have to show me that we're adding something to that, to Topeka, to that community that's not there before. You know, duplication of services, whether it's shoe stores, restaurants, whatever it is, in an already highly saturated, higher socioeconomic area of town, it's going to have to show something different, you know, compared to where, you know, the 29th, I mean, there again, I kind of go back to what we talked about before, you know, the 29th and Wanamaker project. We got to make sure we're doing our part moving forward, that we don't let properties get to that condition, you know, and then have to, you know, bail those systems out. But I'm glad that you asked that, because I think that is something that is very important. And one of the things that we did bring here was talking about making sure that, that's why we did this, why Doug did this, was so we understood what these tools were, the differences between them, and how each project we have to look at, you know, with their own merits prior to moving forward on it. So thanks for asking that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jensen?
I had one more caveat where I feel it would be acceptable for a business to move. If I'm the business owner and I'm renting, and I purchase a building, and I want to move across town to a property I own that I'm trying to leverage these incentives to fix up or something along those lines, to me, it would be acceptable in that case as well, because I'm transitioning from being a renter to being a property owner, in addition to the additional locations and that sort of thing. So.
Councilmember Hiller?
I think that's where the fine tuning between a TIF and a SID comes in as well. In the Academy Sports one, I was very impressed with how that negotiation ended up happening. And because if you remember, there were some new businesses that were new structures and new businesses that came in, but then there was a Joann's where two stores were combined into one, and Orchland's Farm and Home, which was already there. And so for the TIF side of it, the TIF in that one had both property tax increase increments as well as sales tax increase increments. And so in that one, Joann's and Orchland's were held out of the sales tax increase since they were existing businesses in our city, and the decision was not to give up any of their current or growth sales tax. But then everybody, it was a total redo of the whole place, so everybody that was retail did the SID. Part of the advantage of putting the two together, like the one we're looking at 29th and Wanamaker, is that when you've got a mix of office space or space that doesn't generate sales tax, and then some space that does, even if you wanted to just go with one or the other, combining the two gives you what you need to get that property improved. So it was kind of complicated, but the issue of leaving those two out of the sales tax part of this TIF did make sense then.
Additional discussion on this item? Seeing none?
My final comment. Thank you all very much for this input. This is important for us, and I hope if you have any questions that you didn't get answered here tonight or additional input, you can always email me and provide that to me. But this helps us as staff as we go forward with these projects and hopefully continue to bring many to you in the future. So thank you very much.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. City Manager, there was a couple that, I'm trying to think of the one that Doug said, I don't know, we're just kind of asking you guys how you feel about it. If we can have a breakdown on all of it, on what we can do that you brought forward, that would be very helpful. So as we proceed, we will have that information, or we can start studying it or whatever. I think that would be helpful to me. I don't know about the rest, but I kind of feel like some things are kind of halfway brought forward. So if you have something that, whether it's the housing or whatever, if we could have the total package, that would be great. Because I don't feel very, I mean, I'm understanding it more, but I'm just not, I'm probably at 76%. That's not where I want to be.
Councilman Ortiz, I appreciate that, and as we bring projects forward or bring ideas forward that we're looking for approval, we'll make sure that we're doing a good education about what the proposal is for you, so that you're understanding what's being proposed and what actions you'll need to take, so that you'll be able to make an informed decision. And as we explore some of these, especially the housing TIF, if that happens to happen, or as we bring forward areas of town that only will have a district and have no plan or project that's going to go with it, explain what we're doing and proposing to create and why we're choosing the area that we are. So we will do that. We'll make sure.
And I appreciate that, because the housing was one, but it was kind of vague. It was kind of like, this is it. I'm not going to say I wouldn't support it, but I don't know, because it was like, well, we don't really understand. Well, we don't know. Well, we have, you know, we just kind of brought this forward. And
understandable. It is a rarity that it would be done. It's kind of one of those things they wrote into the code, into the state code or state law, and said you can do this, but it's one of those ones where it really needs to be backfilled with information on how we would utilize it. And so we need to do our homework with the developer to make sure that it's going to be supportable, and do our homework in order to present you the best information possible.
absolutely, and as well with the Transportation Development District. I mean, if you're going to bring them forward, I want to know everything about it, and not just as what we think, or, you know, and some examples. So we can, that helps me when I have examples, but I don't know about anybody else, but I look forward to getting more information on what we've discussed.
Wonderful. Councilwoman Heller.
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
It's good to see you, and I just want to say the Deputy Mayor did a fine job. She had us rolling, so I hope you continue to follow.
I just wanted to interject that this conversation sounds very familiar to one that we were having about 10 years ago working on downtown things, and what we realized was nobody had a list, and how could we possibly be doing the best job possible to be luring, at that point, more office and commercial to downtown without a master list. And with that, a bunch of us got together as volunteers with Go Topeka in the lead and put together a booklet that, whereas we were talking at first about maybe 5 different incentives, that book eventually had about 100 in it, because it included the state workforce incentives and the kinds of other incentives that are available to businesses, probably included the housing as well. But we had that printed, and then it was on the Go Topeka website for a long time. It would be worth saving yourself some time. I think there's been some discussion over there about refreshing that resource book as well. And if we kind of got heads together and did it once and made it really comprehensive. Of course, they're dealing more with housing now than they did before. I think we had housing in there, but it'd be good to check. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I want to apologize to everybody. I am here late because I landed today from Puerto Rico. I had to go on an emergency trip. My grandmother has taken a turn for the worst, and we're starting end of care life. So thank you to our deputy mayor, who has been so gracious and covered the meeting. And I had another meeting at 6 o'clock also at the chamber at the Greater Topeka Partnership before getting here. So as you all know, I'm typically here on time. So next item.
What do we do now?
B is a discussion on the proposed community improvement district at Southwest 17th and Wanamaker.
City manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to have Deputy Manager introduce this particular item.
Governing body, thank you again. Good segue into this next discussion. One of the things over the course of the last month or 6 weeks that we've definitely heard loud and clear is the need to get council better information about what projects are coming forward and how those projects are proceeding. And so with that, I think I emailed you this, but we're trying to institute a step this one's a little out of order because of where we were in the process, but moving forward, our process will be that if we have a project coming before you, we will have the developer come and visit with you prior to even asking you to set a public hearing date so that you can ask those questions and just get a general overview of what the project is all about. I think that's going to, as I mentioned last time, stop with some of the unnecessary confusion that's been caused by our getting you lack of information. So with that, tonight we have Bob Johnson, who many of you will remember from a year and a half ago, I guess now, and the Wheatfield project. Bob is here representing EIG, who is wanting to do a CID at 17th and Wanamaker. I was trying to think of a way to get some more acronyms in there, but I could only get CID and EIG. Also with Bob is Anne Marie Queen, who is representing EIG as well. And so with that, I will ask Bob to step forward and go through the project and answer any questions that you might have.
Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council, thank you for having us here tonight. Mayor, I'm sorry to hear about your grandmother. I have appeared in front of many of you before, some of you I have not. Excited to be back in front of those I've presented in front of before, and excited to answer questions and discuss this item with the new folks on the council, at least new since I have been in front of you. Again, I'm Bob Johnson from the Polsinelli Law Firm. My client, again, is Equity Investment Group, represented here tonight by Anne Marie Queen. Before I jump into the project and give you an overview here, I want to just briefly tell you who EIG is. You may not be familiar with them. This is their first Kansas project. They're new to Topeka, and in fact, they were attracted to Kansas by the Topeka market and by this particular property. And so they're excited to be in town. They have an over 30-year history of owning, operating, investing, and managing in commercial real estate businesses and properties, with a particular focus in retail shopping centers like this one. They own and operate retail shopping centers in 9 other states. They are headquartered in Indiana, so they are a Midwest company. And like I said, they identify the Topeka market as a market they view as a market that can potentially grow, and as Councilman Lesser referred to, an area on Wanamaker there that they think can improve, and that this particular property is something with this project that can be a long-term sustainable project at that location. So again, about the location, this is at 17th and Wanamaker as referenced. The black line there gives you the outline of the proposed CID district. EIG owns all of the property within the district, so there are no other property owners within the district besides EIG. I'll kind of describe to you the buildings that you see there. There in the northeast corner is the vacant Kmart building. It also has an adjacent Slumberland filled space to the south of it. Moving down to the southern portion of the site, that building has existing tenants, Bed Bath & Beyond and Hobby Lobby located in that building. And then in the northwest corner, there's a Pizza Hut and AutoZone pad site. It's about 224,000 square feet of retail. And as you more than likely know, the Kmart space was vacated. EIG purchased this site in a challenge time, which is continuing today in the retail sector. And unfortunately for EIG, Kmart closed shortly after the purchase of the site. Obviously, something that was occurring nationally for Kmart as they condensed from many hundreds of stores nationally into many fewer stores than that, including, unfortunately, the store at this location. You can see there the vacant Kmart store and the continuous and monotonous wall and facade there that continues northward along the majority of the site. Also there pictured is the existing pole sign out at one of the primary entrances to the site on Wanamaker that is going to be proposed to be redeveloped as part of this project as well. So why is this project needed? The project is needed because of the extreme large vacant space square footage that was left by Kmart. And As you likely have studied and talked about, I'm sure, in the city extensively, retail right now is undergoing a sea change. We all know that with the rise of internet retail and challenges from Amazon and otherwise, and just changing trends in the retail industry and consumer buying preferences, brick and mortar is challenged. And that doesn't mean brick and mortar is going away. Brick and mortar will stay, but it will condense, and this is happening dynamically by the day. We seem to see in the news new bankruptcies and new closings of retail chains every week. That said, centers that are properly positioned, centers that have the right co-tenancy mix, centers that have the right modern aesthetic and the attraction of shoppers to the location, and centers that do have the right locations, that is critical, will be the ones that survive. And so this project is all about repositioning the center in the wake of the Kmart exodus to be a long-term sustainable center. And so really, truly, I want to hit on a point I just mentioned as really being the main point here, and that is co-tenancy. Strong tenants want to be around other strong tenants, and that will drive the success of the centers that do survive in Topeka and everywhere else. And so what we're looking to do here is to chop up that Kmart space. The big box Kmarts, they don't exist anymore. It's not coming here, it's not coming anywhere. And so in that 2.5 year, it might be a little longer than that now since Kmart has gone out, period of time, what EIG has been trying to do is figure out the best way to go about repositioning this box, given that no one in the market anywhere is going to come in and backfill it. So the best plan is to chop that up into 5 tenant spaces. Tenants that want to be located near each other, tenants that will sign leases of decent length so that we know that we can count on the investment we're making here, the private investment coupled hopefully here with the CID to make this an economically viable project that will not create blight in the city, that will not be a drain on the city's property tax and the sales tax revenue as it is now without a tenant in that space. And it'll be something that will lift all boats. Obviously, it'll be a good thing for the owner. It will also be a good thing for the city and the other taxing jurisdictions and the general public of Topeka to have a property here that can last the test of time. So how do we propose to get there? It's again, a chop up of that space, a total rebuild out of that space into 5 new tenant spaces. It's a complete facade renovation of that Kmart space. It is associated parking lot and landscaping improvements around that area. And it's upgrading the signage at one of those primary entrances to Wanamaker and on 17th, going from the signage that you see all along Wanamaker today, which is existing pylon big pole signs, and do a monument sign there at the entrance coming into off of Wanamaker, and to also provide the right elements, as we've been talking about with your planning staff, to make that sign on 17th adjacent to the existing garden center look a whole lot better as well. Those are expensive items, but I think that those are things that really do matter to the shopping public, and they matter to tenants. Tenants want good signage that can be seen by the public, that looks good, that looks modern. Same with the facade element of the shopping center. This tool is being utilized as I wasn't here last week when you talked about CIDs, but this may have come up. This tool is being used around the state for this exact purpose, repositioning centers in good locations to be modern looking and to have that aesthetic that will attract tenants and shoppers to the site. The reason it's being used so prevalently and the reason that we are proposing to use it here is because for the present day, most of those centers that are in good locations can continue to plod along at a very low return, but not collapse because of their locations. However, they can't make the kind of capital investment to modernize the center, at least in this case and in many others across the state, without the CID assistance as well to bring the aesthetics to bear that'll make the project attract tenants for the long term and provide that co-tenancy mix that'll sustain the center. I want to show you some elevations or some renderings here of the proposed project. You see it at the bottom. The top again is the existing Kmart facade. It'll be chopped up into those 5 tenant spaces you see below, given the modern aesthetic, the modern look that you see for new centers or other renovated centers with some architectural features that are a bit hard to see here, but have been through the review of your planning staff and have passed that muster. Here is a depiction of the monument sign that would replace that pole sign there. Not in color, I'm sorry, so it's a little hard to see the exact features there, but you can see that it's got the design element, the stone there that would go along the columns. It's a bit expensive, but again, it looks modern, it looks nicer, it looks more upscale than that pole sign does, and we think will provide a good front door to the project. So how do we get there? First of all, just kind of explain to you the range of costs here. So the base cost of this project would be $31.4 million. I recently learned, and this is good news, that we may have a new tenant that wants to come to the site and would require a build out of additional space. There'd be new space that would need to be built where the garden center is today. That would cost about $2.5 million to do. That would increase the CID revenue by about $780,000. You can see the kind of range there, and that's the range on the CID request as well. So it would increase the cost by 2.5. It would also increase the CID revenue by about $780,000. It's commensurate essentially on a public to private basis there. So what I mean by CID cap $6 million plus interest or $6.7 million plus interest, we would agree to the $6 million cap. If we didn't get that tenant, we hope we do, and I think it would be good for everybody if we did. And if we did, we'd ask to have a higher cap at 6.7 plus interest. How does that work? I'm sure you guys talked about this in depth last week and on other projects as well, but I just, as a refresher, it would be an add-on CID sales tax, and so it would be a 1% CID sales tax. You can go up to 2, but we're asking for 1 here for a period of 22 years. It would be on a pay-as-you-go basis. So as our sales at our site only, nobody else's property, generate the CID sales tax, that would be reimbursable to the developer over a period of 22 years for statutorily eligible costs, those costs of the project that I referred to before. Just to carve out what the request does not include, again, CID really is the most efficient tool and most widely used tool for this exact type of project because it truly is driven off the retail sales. It's driven off the sales only at the site. It is used for a retail type project, so it makes sense in this sort of circumstance to use this tool. And so often in these cases, sorts of things that might make sense in other projects aren't needed here, and we're not asking for them. And what those would include are bond financing, so there's no related city risk for the project. Any cost that we expend up front. And we've got our CID cap, but if we don't generate it, we don't generate it. We don't get it back if it doesn't get generated from our site. So there's no city risk. The city never has to cut a check or has any sort of financial obligation for the incentive granted in this case. Special assessments, which are possible through the CID statute, are not being requested here. Again, only the add-on CID sales tax, and no incremental property tax or sales tax capture. And I don't want that to be confusing. No base property tax or sales tax capture either. That may have been inherent there, but I just want to be clear about that the base property taxes and sales taxes that are there today would obviously continue to be produced and go to the taxing jurisdictions. But anything in addition that would be produced, which I think would be very reasonable to anticipate if the CID project was approved, would go back to the taxing jurisdictions also for both property and sales taxes. I want to hit on the tenant mix for a second because I think Councilman Lesser brought this up, and I do think it's a very important discussion to have. I think it's important to have in the context of this project and any other. Nobody wants to incentivize stealing a tenant from one area and coming to another. We understand that, and we understand the challenge there. So the tenant mix in this case, I guess maybe before I describe that, I think it's also fair to understand that or discuss that that mix is going to include a mixture of tenants that are new to market and a mixture of tenants that have other circumstances that would require them or motivate them to move to different locations regardless of an incentive, that were having their leases expire or other circumstances at the property they're located at now and are deciding to move somewhere else. So that circumstance is exactly what's happening here. We have 3 leases that we've signed and we have 2 LOIs. So we have 3 leases for those 5 tenant spaces and 2 LOIs, which we hope turn into leases. All of those tenants want the other tenants to be there in order to move forward. So the leases that we have signed now, we're contingent upon each other to move forward. The 2 LOIs that are pending are contingent upon each other to move forward as well. So the two new to market tenants that we've already signed for leases are DSW and Ulta and Five Below, excuse me. And Petco's lease at 20th and Wanamaker is coming due. They are not going to stay at that location. They wanted to be co-tenants with those 2 tenants that we assigned new to market, and so they want to move to this project. Circumstances are such that they are going to move, and they like our location. They like the Hobby Lobby and Bed Bath that are already located there as well. And so again, in the retail market, as I discussed earlier, there's going to be a consolidation to properties of good, solid, credit-worthy tenants. That's what's happening here, and it's again, a synergy between these tenants. With regard to the LOIs, DSW is one of those I referred to, and the other one is a tenant that is located at the mall, at Westridge Mall right now. And as we all know, that's a challenged property. They've already lost a couple of tenants, major anchor tenants at the mall today, and I unfortunately think that's going to continue. There's a tenant with lease coming due there, and they want to be located by the other tenants that we've already signed at our property. So it's a mixture. It's something, again, that is independent of the CID. Certainly the concept of having a modernized center, as I discussed, is important to all of these tenants, but it is not that they are being subsidized through the CID. The CID is coming back to the developer for doing the work at for the project, not being passed to the tenant, directly to the tenant. So it's a challenge given the retail environment today, but I wanted to make sure that I was clear to you exactly what the tenant mix is going to be. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions from the body? Yes, Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you have a basic timeline for any of this yet?
Absolutely. So if we're able to get this approved in the next month or 2, we would like to start yet this year, hopefully in Q3. And we'd like to, the interior demo work has already started to begin, given that we've got Ulta and Five Below that need spaces delivered to them. And so that work can continue. Unfortunately, that's not during the winter cycle. That would have been nice to do during the winter cycle, but Q1, Q2, potentially Q3 of 2020 could be delivery of this entire project, depending on how the construction season is and how bad it is. If it's like this year, it'll be difficult.
It'll be 2024.
Yeah, this year was challenging, obviously, for just about every development project, but we think we could deliver it by Q2 of next year if the winter season is not as harsh.
Thank you.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Johnson, great to see you again.
Thank you, sir.
And just to, I guess, to reiterate this, you are not asking for a TIF. You're only asking for a CID.
That's right, Councilman. Yes, sir.
I will tell you, I really appreciate that. Seems like everyone leads with the TIF. It seems like the last 3 or 4 years. So I really appreciate that you guys are looking at coming and investing money in Topeka, and you're not asking to shift the property tax burden to the rest of taxpayers. So right. I really appreciate that. Did have one question, though. As much as I appreciate that, this might be about the most confusing map I've ever seen.
Sure, let's go back to it. Yep.
Because you said red lines, and I have red lines on here.
Yeah.
I have.
Yep.
Would you mind just, I guess for our education as well as people who may be watching, because it looks like you just have the Kmart store, then you don't have the middle section, and then there's like there's two hashed out properties to the south of the.
This is a very confusing map. You're absolutely right. So, and I can explain it. So the black outline is the outline of the CID, and everything within the black outline EIG owns. The red lines are the parcel lines. So the way we were able to get an aerial is to go to the GIS map and pull that off, and we should have looked into whether you could remove parcel lines, and I apologize I didn't do that. So what you can see here is that EIG owns two different parcels, both of which would be in the CID. The Kmart building is on a separate parcel there, and the Hobby Lobby Bed Bath building and the pad site are also on a separate parcel. So those two are EIGs, and that's what's within the CID district. There are two additional parcels that are greenfield you see in the southeast corner. EIG doesn't own those, and those are owned by someone else that we're unrelated to, and I don't believe wants to be in the CID, and we're obviously not going to force anybody into a CID. And so those are outside of the CID. They could be added at some point if that owner wants to be a part of it, or if the city wanted to take the initiative to do that, but that's not EIG's request. That's not something we control or are interested in.
Thank you for that. And so just to, I guess for my clarification, so the only things that you don't own are those two parcels, and then like I think it's a Jiffy Lube and a Wendy's and a something else there.
Yep,
so things are right along Wanamaker.
Those pad sites in the southeast and central area we don't own either. I think it is a Jiffy Lube and a
Wendy's and a
Applebee.
That's Amazon, I think.
Perkins, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Perkins.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, how does the EIG, how do they keep their tenants? I mean, because you hear their lease is up, we want to move. And I'm sure this is a great location, where Petco is now. That's not a bad location. That's on 21st. But
sure.
How do you, and then you hear people moving out of the mall. I mean, how do you guys plan to keep your tenants?
Yeah. Great question, and I think EIG is thinking about that every day. As every owner of a retail property, it is a challenging environment, and rates are getting depressed. And, market rates are driving down for retail tenants, and that's why these projects are getting harder to do in the retail world. So how do you keep tenants? You give them rates that they demand, market rates that they demand. It's just market-driven, lease negotiations. You provide them space like this that is going to pull customers into their shops, and you also find other tenants that they want to be around. And in fact, in many of these leases, they require that tenant right there by name be next to me or be 2 doors down, or else I get to terminate my lease. If the co-tenancy requirements are not just ethereal, they are deal points in these leases. And so again, that's why I say that going forward in the future, this site or others, the ones that are going to survive are the ones that tenants, they conglomerate together. The strongest tenants, the most creditworthy tenants, are going to join up and be close to each other. So that's how a property owner is going to survive, a retail property owner, without going into bankruptcy like some other properties may be doing, unfortunately, by fighting and clawing and being better negotiators and finding the right tenants and having the relationships and all the other business things you would do to make sure that you get one and then you get another, and then it kind of snowballs into something that is, sustainable for the long term. It's a challenge. It's difficult. So it's a very good question.
Well, and I always hear because they're going up, we want out of our lease because they're not, good owners or whatever. But it just amazes me because you're right. When one moves out, then you've got like a spiral, so thank you.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Bob, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
You got your work cut out for you on me on this one, I have to tell you. I'm really struggling with this one. I hear a little bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul for us in regards to a pet, the pet store and the mall and the mall is what it is, I understand that, but it is difficult to then have that conversation with other owners, losing the tenant to somewhere where we're incented right down the street. The other thing I struggle with is, the one thing that for sure I'm doing to my constituents is, Hobby Lobby, Bed Bath & Beyond, Pizza Hut, these have all, AutoZone have all been successful businesses that my constituents have supported. And, to renovate the other facility, they're going to get to pay, their prizes of 1% more in sales tax for when they visit those stores. So, I'm certainly willing to listen to you and as we move forward and dig into this deeper, but I will tell you, this almost fits the perfect picture to me of the ones that I don't want to do, to be honest with you. So like I said, your work's cut out for you. So I appreciate your presentation, and it is nice though, and I applaud you for sharing. I mean, not very many people would have came up and said, hey, guys moving down the street from one place to the other. So I do appreciate your honesty, and that's why you're one of the best. So
Thank you, Councilman. Appreciate that.
Additional questions? Councilwoman Hiller.
Two, one for you and one maybe for city manager and deputy. What I've heard asked a number of times, maybe it goes without saying, but what were the negotiations with these existing businesses whose property you purchased about adding the 1% sales tax? Are
Yep.
they agreeable or just?
Great question, and it's a fair question. Yes, we have approached all of our tenants, and they are okay with it, including the ones, and I know this is distinct from what you were saying. You're speaking about the constituents in the Topeka public, and I understand that point, and thank you for that feedback. On the other side, the tenants are okay with it. We've talked to them about it. The Bed Bath and the Hobby Lobby, even though their spaces are not getting renovated, they see the lift from the ability to go get these other tenants to redo that Kmart space. It's not good for them either that Kmart remains a vacant big box and looking outmoded and outdated. They know that they will get more customers to the site if that property is renovated as well. So they're supportive. All of the tenants that we currently have are supportive of the CID.
Good to know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to see you back.
Good to see you.
You
Thank
get
you.
better each time.
Thank you. Practicing.
There you go. Well, you're welcome then, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The other question I had, we were talking earlier about just policy in general, and we have the threshold on the TIF, not the SID, I guess, of the 20% participation. And so you can react to this. I want to see what they say too. And I'm sorry, I was fishing through here because somehow I brought all the other agenda items and had that one out and made notes, but I don't have it. But as I recall, when the budget that you put in sort of Cliff's Notes out there was outlined out, of the 31 to 33 million, about 18 something was your purchase price to purchase that property in the first place.
That's right.
And then the 6 or 7 that you identified here that would be the SID, and a lot of the rest of it was tenant improvements. So it appeared that it was pretty much 100% of the money that EIG was putting into the improvements in the overall property and the signage and so on, as long as things worked out, was going to be paid for by the SID. So I don't think I saw a 20% participation of EIG in that. I mean, there was a purchase, there were the tenant improvements, but if you separated them out and you were looking just at the project of improving it, I'm not sure that there was 20% on the part of the developer in there.
If I may. I think your facts are right, but if I could just kind of connect them.
Please.
Yeah, so 18 million was the purchase price. The improvements are roughly 13 million or 15.5 million, I think. So it'd be 31.5 roughly, or 33 and change. Yeah, 0.9, whatever, yeah. And so from EIG's perspective, at least from our perspective, all of that's real money. Yeah,
absolutely.
So the acquisition is part and parcel of the investment that they have made in the project. And so from our perspective, it's 19%, I think, 19 to 20% of the CID against the cost inclusive of the purchase price. And so ironically enough, I was sitting here listening to the conversation. That was, as Doug referenced, the CID policy is silent on that, so there was no intention to hit that number on the dot, I can tell you. But I'm glad that we were in the range as you guys were talking about it. That wasn't intentional. That's just what we think we can produce vis-a-vis the 31 million from our perspective investment in the project, or 33 million. So it hits the 19-20% metric from that perspective of EIG's total investment in the project.
I just remember in that learning curve that we've been having over the last few weeks, the description was on a simple SID project that a developer would put their own money into buying the property, use somebody else's money to fix it up, and then as soon as it was done, sell it, make a profit on that purchase price, and the 100% of the other money would.
One thing I think I should point out is that we aren't asking for reimbursement of the land acquisition cost.
Correct.
That's something that we, I think, had in our original budget, decided that wasn't politically palatable with your policy and all that. It makes sense, I get it. So we did take that out, and so understand that perspective, and that's why we did that.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Lesser.
Yeah, I had broken the numbers down. It is an 81% to 19% breakdown when you do bring in the acquisition of the land and the buildings and the property, for lack of a better term. When you do take that out, it's about 6 million is basically what it comes down to, about 50% across that. My follow-up question to that is, what is generally this entity's philosophy? Will they hold on to this property? You know, for instance, the Academy property, when we did that developer's business plan is he sells it shortly after that. What is?
I think it's property by property for EIG. They've held some properties for a very long time. They've sold some properties in shorter windows of time. I don't think they have a plan here to sell the property or to necessarily hold the property. I think that they want to see how it does. And I think I could not stand up here and tell you if somebody knocked on the door and said, I want to give you, a huge check for this property, that they wouldn't consider it, but they don't have a plan today to immediately turn around and flip the property either. So,
well, and that's one thing I fundamentally have some issues with, that is not necessarily for this conversation, I guess, but that I do want to know is in situations like that where it does get leveraged, as the property does boom take over, and then next thing you know it's sold and for a big profit, and where in a situation like this, I would be curious to know why we wouldn't start looking at, if that's the case, then us also getting some return on our investment for a situation like that. I'm asking you a question more than that.
Sure.
In regards to if that's ever been done before, not necessarily specifically this property.
I understand the thought, and I guess the way that the city
even
gets,
it's just compensate for what the 8119.
Yeah, I guess one thought I have is, whether this project or any other property, the city gets a return on the investment indirectly. Obviously, there's not a direct way that they could get a return on investment in the way of participating in a sale or something. But if a property is on the books for 20 million and it's sold for 50 million, the property is going to be valued at a much higher rate, probably closer to that $50 million sale price on the next January 1st. And so the city's going to get an immediate cascade of property tax coming out of the increased value of the property. The assessor is going to look at that sale price and go, that's what that property is worth, not what I had it on the books for. So I do think that if an incentive project, this or any other, increases the value of a property, there is not only value increased by whether that owner or developer holds the property, because if there's an improvement to the property tax value is going to go up during that hold period. We expect the sales are going to go up as well. So there's sales tax revenue coming back from the city. So there's a return on investment in a hold situation.
Sure.
And then again, I think if there's a sale for and a developer does well in a sale, I think the city participates through the tax revenue indirectly, again, in the way I described.
Good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
Do I recall, maybe incorrectly, that there's empty space between Bed Bath & Beyond and Hobby Lobby? And
I think there is a very thin, skinny tenant space there. Anne Marie, is that right?
Actually, the way it sits right now is Hobby Lobby has a lease for that entire section, that entire building. And we, in addition, have an LOI from Hobby Lobby to lease the entire space for another 10 years. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're pretty confident that that will be stable.
They'll fill into that
Yeah.
central space as well.
If a situation comes up where somebody just absolutely wants it, we certainly have the option of going back to Hobby Lobby and saying, hey, do you want to give up some space? That's a negotiation that may happen down the line, but it's not really something we would pursue at this time.
Sure. Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
We now move on to item C, if the clerk would read.
C is discussion concerning affordable housing and the Topeka Housing Trust Fund.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight I bring before you a third draft of the Housing Trust Fund Ordinance. The ordinance will establish the purpose and guidelines for the Housing Trust Fund. The changes are shown in green in your copy in the third draft. There are a number of changes, but a couple of the notes regarding changes that are most important. There's additional of 3 additional members in the review committee: the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation representative, the Federal Home Loan Bank representative, and the Citizens Advisory Council designee to become part of the committee that would review these requests if money was in the Housing Trust Fund. It also creates more criteria regarding the review of these particular items and to be considered for funding. And there are a few other minor changes that occur within it, but those are probably the largest ones. I think Councilwoman Hiller, she made some requests of some changes, and we were able to work through a lot of them. Not all are in there, and we'll let her decide if she would like to make other additional changes or not. Our purpose here tonight is to get your input regarding this. If you have other items that you would like to see changed in this ordinance as it's drafted, with working towards the purpose of getting eventual approval of this ordinance in the future. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Before we go into discussion, I would like to invite the individual that signed up for public comment on this item to address the body. That way we can include that in our conversation. The individual signed up to speak is Steve Schiffelbein.
Good evening. It's been a long night, right? I'll try to be brief. I'm a board member of Topeka Jump, the Justice Unity Ministry Project. We've done a careful reading of the revision, and we're very happy with the changes that have been made. Thank you very much, Mr. Trout. As a community, I think we're beginning to recognize the importance of safe and affordable housing. In fact, we simply cannot afford not to do something more than what we're currently doing. For low-income families, affordable housing is critical to health. Affordable housing, which means not paying more than 30% of your income on housing, means you have some income available for other basic needs: food, clothing, and medical care. Housing trust funds are been proven effective nationally in many communities across the country. So it's time for us to get with it. We appreciate the changes, as I've said, that have come into this additional draft. When we did a careful reading, we kind of said, well, you know, it's kind of missing a priority for very low-income people in the review criteria in the purpose statement. 30% of adjusted median income. It's it's there, but it's not really strong enough as we would like it to have it be. And I think legal staff can figure out how to add some wording, either in the purpose statement or in the review criteria. The review criteria goes to 80% adjusted median income, for example, which is okay. That gives some flexibility, but priority for 30% adjusted median income would be desirable. And we like to see contractors and developers to be part of that advisory role review committee, because those are the folks that know what's a doable, workable project. And we appreciate the additional changes that have been made already. So this is a great opportunity. It really is, to take a significant step towards ensuring even the most vulnerable people in our community have a safe and affordable place to call home. And we look forward to your eventual approval of a housing trust fund. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Floor is not open for discussion. Anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to make about the proposed ordinance that's here for discussion tonight? Councilwoman Clear. Deputy Mayor.
It says there's no budgetary impact to the city. How much staff time is going to go to, I guess, overseeing this?
It would depend on when we would receive an application, Councilwoman. When we would do that, I would imagine there'll be multiple hours of staff time to be able to review these, because we'll be looking at many factors regarding the ability of the particular contractor. Does it meet the requirements of the desire of what we want to try and impact with housing? The amount requested versus the amount of investment, some of those types of analysis. But I can't give you a specific number of hours at this point, not having received, any application with this being new. But we would have some staff time of our individuals that are salaried employees that are part of this application, that are part of this committee.
It says, Director of Neighborhood Relations hereby authorized to establish the housing. So that's going to take staff time to establish the Topeka Housing Trust.
Which line, ma'am? Which line are you looking at?
131.
131, okay.
I just wonder whose plate is this going to go on? And it is going to have a monetary effect on the city because of the salaries and the time.
It will, as regarding time. When it says a budgetary impact, that means we're not allocating any money to the trust fund out of our general fund dollars or any other fund at this point. That's not something that we're seeking with this. It's simply to establish it. And yes, the Director of Neighborhood Relations is the head of the review committee, and so that would be a part of her responsibility, that director's responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I'm particularly excited to see this moving forward. I know there's been some talk about doing a housing study for the community at large. I'm wondering, is the intent to bring this to the body after we've had the input from a housing study, if indeed that moves forward, so that we can ensure that what we're doing here matches up with the information we've received from that project?
Councilman, I don't believe that the creation of this ordinance, approval of this ordinance, would have any impact regarding the housing study. I think the housing study is currently out for RFP. We're waiting to receive individuals, companies that are interested in submitting to complete that study. I think what this establishes is an opportunity for people that would want to donate money to the city to put into the Housing Trust Fund the vehicle to do so. It doesn't necessarily it isn't predicated on the fact of the housing study telling us one thing or another.
Okay.
I think this is something that we establish, and they are two separate issues. Now, it might show from the housing study the needs that we have related to affordable housing are more prevalent in an area, which might say, lead us to the fact that we would hopefully push to see some contributions that would come into the Housing Trust Fund to allow us to do a project. So they can go along on their own paths. They're not dependent on each other.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Trout, we've been talking about a housing trust fund here for a couple of years. And all that time, I've never quite understood what it does different than any other thing we have. Is it simply an account that people can donate money to that can only be used for housing? Is that it? I mean, would you mind kind of going over the parameters of it?
Right. The primary purpose of the Housing Trust Fund, Councilman, is to be able to provide someone that would like to support housing in the community. Could be a corporation, could be a wealthy individual, whomever that would want to make a contribution to see affordable housing. We do some affordable housing in smaller ways by providing lots to organizations like Cornerstone and Habitat. And so we're already supporting it, but we just don't have a large amount of money. This would be a portion of money that would be hopefully filling the gap that a corporation that would want to do a large project, especially large projects, to be able to have that extra funding that they might need in order to move a project forward.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to thank the JUMP people for working so steadfastly on this, and the city manager for bringing it forward again. I'm not sure that Mr. Schiffelbein had the draft that the city manager sent to all of us. Is it posted on the
It was in this.
on the agenda?
Yes, it is attached to the agenda.
I did participate. I met with JUMP, and then I met with the city manager to try and get some of the things forward. There is language now prioritizing very low income for two of the disbursement, the most logical disbursement. It just says it's a preference so that nobody's limited if there's a really great 80% project and something. One of the beauties, I think, of where this is right now is most people know we've had a housing trust fund for a long time. It is a tool for the toolbox. And so it can sit there pretty dormant if nobody is wanting to give money to it or has a project for which they want to solicit money. But if we've developed a tool that's nimble, which I think this one is, and easy to let sit, that's not costly in terms of staff. One of the things I like about the way the board is put together this time is that it's the logical people who would be called on anyway by Ms. Hahn and her staff at Neighborhood Relations, their partners at the State Housing Resources Corporation, a representative of the Citizens Advisory Council. They meet anyway. One of the reasons we recommended the change even to say a designee from the CAC instead of the chair is that if, for instance, these opportunities come up in an intermittent way, let's say something developed down in Highland Park, well, maybe the CAC would designate somebody from Highland Park to be the rep on the consideration panel for that time by not locking that particular representation even. So I like the way it's nimble at this point. I've told the JUMP folks, though, after all, Nehemiah's coming up, so we can encourage people to donate money to this sometime soon. I do have a couple of suggested amendments. The city manager knew I would bring them, but one of the changes that you will see in the text here looks small, but I would suggest it's very important. And that is on page 3 in line 69. Instead of just saying the Housing Trust Fund or fund is a public-private financial resource that can disperse funds for blah, 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 blah uses, the language has been added to accept and disperse funds. And I personally think that additional role is important and deserves a little more description in the description about what the committee can do. That way, I mean, it's not like if somebody wants to just, let's say all the churches got together and wanted to make contributions every Easter or every month or something like that, that could be accepted as a sequential donation by the fund. But by doing that, by accepting the donation when it comes in, then people know it's there, and they know whether it's a one-time deal or whether it's expected to be, to continue to grow over time. They know whether somebody's out soliciting funds or whether it's just a lucky windfall. And it helps to then alert all those partners that the money is there. And allow that discussion in a really organic way about, well, was somebody expecting this? You've also got the ability of the Housing Trust Fund, if you've got a good project and you need some private match. A lot of times when that happens, as we've seen in the last couple of years, that private match goes straight to the developer. The trust fund isn't needed, and so there's no reason to add that layer in and take the time, as Deputy Mayor Clear said. But if there is something that somebody wants to do or wants to have a campaign for donations, sometimes when that happens, though, people want the donations restricted. They want them to go for a certain use, like 30% or 50% of median. By adding the language in there that the board is involved in accepting money, not just giving out money, it allows just codifying a targeted donation as well. Or in some cases, turning it down. I mean, if somebody wants to give this money just to do something, or for a particular developer or something like that, that people don't think is a very good idea, it gives you the chance to say no thank you. Not that you couldn't anyway, but I think the authority in there is helpful. So you've got some language about that in the amendment sheet that I sent around. Pardon?
Where were you? Which line?
I was only, on line 69, the language has been inserted that the board, the fund could consider accepting as well as spending money. But there isn't really any discussion later about how it would do that. And so you've got a suggested amendment from me to add that language in on line 170 where it talks about the committee's role. My understanding from visiting with the JUMP folks, and I think understanding it anecdotally from my colleagues, is that if you notice on lines 230 to 232, where on page 10, where it talks about how the decisions would be made, the disbursement decisions would be made, the language in the draft that has been given to us says that the committee would make a recommendation and that the city manager would make the final decision. You've got some suggested language from me that would allow the, sort of like the planning commission decisions go, the city manager gets it to review. If they want it reconsidered, they can send it back to the committee, but the final approval would come then to the council. I think it's important that we all know that it happened. We all understand that these amounts of money that are being dispersed could be anywhere from $500 to $500,000 or more. We don't really want to get into too many details in there, but I think I would suggest that the final decision should be made by the council. So you've got some language to consider there. The other thing that had gone through with JUMP, so for your consideration in the handout, was to create an affordable housing alliance as well. To create a structure that would kind of be the successor to the Mayor's Commission on Affordable Housing that has happened in the past, really prior to Mayor de la Isla. It wouldn't need to meet more than once a year, the way this is written, but to set up something that's routine, where at least once a year the city staff brought all the affordable housing providers together and they kind of reviewed what sort of progress they'd made in the year, what sort of plans they had, shared information about possible funding sources. This, in fact, could refresh interest in using the Housing Trust Fund or not. Where there has been a housing study, and we've got one coming in, then it's a chance to look back at that housing study and check the data. Just do an update once a year. Provides a framework then if something bigger comes along, that this affordable housing alliance already is a framework that exists. So you've got that suggestion there. Other than that, I just would have a question for city manager. When we last talked about this, you weren't quite sure whether the city would hold the fund or whether it would be at the community foundation. Are we any closer to knowing?
Councilwoman Hiller, the exact location, right now, we would have it as a city designated fund and be able to maintain it with us. So right now, we can do that. The question would be for them is, Your second question that you list there, will the contributions be tax deductible? We're still working to confirm that between legal and finance, trying to find the specific answer to that question. But we also are pursuing the potential option of working with the Topeka Community Foundation to be potentially the holder of that money for those tax deductible purposes. And so we're working through the details, and we'll get those figured out.
Do we need to get those figured out before we would actually pass this?
I think we should be able to get an answer to accomplish that, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Jensen.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for Councilwoman Hiller. I'm curious why you want to put us in the driver's seat and not the Housing Authority. They're the government entity that's responsible for housing in this community, and they're much more adapted at managing and handling this process than are we as the city, given that it's their primary job. So why us and not them?
Councilwoman Hiller.
That hadn't really occurred to me. I mean, having gone through my career in the affordable housing arena, they are a provider. They're not the provider, and they're independent. We sure could do that. I thought that what we were looking at was creating a city housing trust fund, so.
And if I might, so the city spun off the Housing Authority years ago to make them essentially the responsible governmental entity. There are a number of private nonprofits, you're correct, but they're the only quasi-governmental one that I'm aware of. So
you're right.
I'm just curious as to, it seems to me it would be much more suited to have them sort of overseeing this than it would us, as we have our hands full solving the other problems in the community.
I would give credit to our staff in terms of trying to be proactive in terms of without getting city money involved in it, but being creative about positioning ourselves for affordable housing development. The Housing Authority actually has been one of the primary developers lately, which is a good thing. Whether then you would think it would be better, the city is really kind of neutral. We're not in the development business. We'd be pulling together some of the people who are on the proposed board right now are those partner funders like the state who make decisions about tax credits or about other grants. And so it makes it sort of neutral. I think the way it's structured right now is it would take very little time unless we as a city chose to affirmatively do it or somebody else really wanted to get it moving. It's a thought.
Well, thank you.
Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. City Manager, the first time I met with the JUMP group, they had asked for the city to fund $1 million towards the trust fund. And then the second time I met with them, they asked for $2 million. And is the city funding this with taxpayer money?
No, sir, it is not.
Okay.
We're not proposing, and once we get to the operating budget, you will not see a line for us to fund this in any way with this next general fund operating budget.
Okay, excellent. Mayor, if I had one more comment, and back to what Councilwoman Hiller was saying is, I have to disagree, and I don't think that we should politicize these type of decisions. I think it needs to stay with the review board and with the city manager's decision, like it reads. I don't think we need to bring these to the council. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just two quick things. I don't have an answer at this point in time, but it's for discussion. But it seems to me that the 9-person committee is awful heavy city-wise in regards to resources and balancing it out. Of the 9, 6 of them we have the city employees. So I would be curious to just if we could take another look at that and see if there's some other options we can get a little bit more diversity on it for that. The other question I had is in reviewing starts at line 154, eligible uses shall include but not limited to. On line 158, it talks about supportive services. And then when I go back to the definition, in my opinion, it's pretty ambiguous what that means. I would like to know some more, have a little more clarification. When you go to supportive services, it says, supportive service means housing related or other services that assist individuals and families to gain and retain affordable quality. We need to tighten that up, I think. I mean, that could be anything from, counseling to pooper scooping, to be quite honest with you. I mean, it's all across the board in regards to what it could be. I mean, it could be anything to do with the yard. So I think we need to clean that up a little bit. Other than that, it looks pretty good.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor.
I agree with Councilman Cohen. I don't think it needs to be brought to the council to approve. And I also noticed that a suggestion on line 221 was to say, does the experience and financial stability of the application, and Councilmember Hiller had said applicant?
Yep.
But there's a big difference. Are you talking about the person, the financial and experience stability of the person, or are you talking about the actual paper that it's written on? So we need to decide which one is it, because there is a big difference between the two.
I thought it was a mistake.
Additional questions or comments?
221.
Councilwoman Hiller, would you like to respond?
I can answer that one. Actually, the criteria here are largely drawn from the SID guidelines on how to review, and this one, I think the intention, I didn't type it, but was that you're looking at the experience and financial stability of the applicant in terms of their experience in developing, in this case, affordable housing, their financial ability to carry the project and so on, rather than the application itself.
Deputy Mayor.
As long as that's what we mean.
Yeah, I mean, I thought so. I thought it was, spell check or something.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Trout, on the face of this, I mean, I don't have an issue with it, hardly anything I've read in this. I am wondering, though, is there any unintended consequences of this? And by that, I mean, for instance, when we did the East Topeka Learning Center, we had to demonstrate there was a gap. Will the fact that the city has funds in a thing for housing in any way impact, like federal grants or state things that we may otherwise be eligible for?
Let me make sure I understand your question. So if there was funds in this particular trust fund, whether it affect our ability to receive grants or other type of funding?
That's correct.
I think that depending on how it's termed for the usage, it might, but unlikely from the standpoint of it's geared for us to be able to consider these projects. And right now, a lot of our allocations that we receive from CDBG are set up by formula. And so we're receiving a formula based on the factors that HUD defines. And unless, I mean, I don't know if anybody else has any comments. If, is Sasha here?
Yeah. Back there.
If Director Hahn could come forward, if she would make any comments regarding how we receive that monies and what kind of impact that might have, I'd appreciate it.
It's leverage. It's leverage.
Mr. Trout, governing body members, good evening. Mr. Trout is exactly right. The dollars that we use to develop housing are formula dollars. The competitive grants that we receive are our Shelter Plus Care grant and some others. So the answer is no, it shouldn't. If we held a trust fund that was served as gap funding, I do not believe that it will impact those monies that we receive to develop or support the development of affordable housing currently.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Conversely, it could help if it was gap funding or leverage, if you will, for competitive grants. Could it not?
Maybe.
I think so.
I'd have to think about that.
Yeah.
Additional questions or comments with regards to this item? Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. I just have a couple comments. I like this coming before the council so that we can see what it's doing, especially if we got staff involved and more staff than other participants on the board. And as for the Topeka Housing Authority, I think they got their hands full, with all due respect. I too have met on several occasions with the Jump people, and I know a lot of my constituents are very unhappy with the Topeka Housing Authority. And, you know, their facilities are old. They're old, they need a lot of work. And I don't know, the Jump people can correct me, I think they're looking for new housing that there's no lead in it, that is winterized, there's, you know, efficient. I see somebody shaking their head, yeah. And you go to Pine Ridge, you know, yeah, it's 30% of your income, but half your heating cost is going out the windows. And it's not a slam on Topeka Housing Authority. Don't get me wrong. They have done a great job with what they've had and the funding that they've had. Some of the new development that's gone up, and in my area at your bar place, it looks excellent. But you know, times have changed. And there's been conversation with the council that, you know, and Topeka Housing Authority that they need to tear Pine Ridge down and start over. Getting in there, the emergency vehicles, it was appropriate in 1960 something, but it's not appropriate today, you know. So when you look at the high rises, you know, the windows are airy. We've got outdated furnaces. I mean, they just keep replacing them. I had a complaint last week about a rail, just a rail. So I think this is great, and I think what the people that I've talked to is affordable housing that they can go in at 30%, and it doesn't eat up their cost of living there. And anything that's new is automatically going to be ADH compliant. And so I think that's what they're looking forward to. And it just, some of these places are not ADHA, and it costs a lot. And so hopefully that's what we can look forward to is new facilities. There's a lot of places we can build it, but there's a lot of facilities that when you go around to those facilities that are they're just kind of run down, and people are living there because that's the only place that there is to go, you know. And I think the Jump people have made it clear that there needs to be affordable housing, more affordable housing that would be a good place to call home, and half of their utilities is not going out the window, and a safe place. You know, when you look at Echo Ridge, yeah. I mean, they've done a great job there, Topeka Housing Authority, and they're slowly coming up, but they've got a long ways to go. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilman Jensen.
If I could just respond briefly to that. The only reason I bring it up is because there are an incredible amount of duplication of services in our community in the nonprofit world, whether they will admit that or not. And what I don't want to do is get the city involved where essentially we were involved and then spun off that entity years ago for whatever reason. I wasn't around when that happened, but there's such duplication of services in this community. We spend so much money that could go directly to the people that really need it on administering services again and again, and that's what I don't want to happen here. So if there's an organization that's already doing something, then there's no reason for the city to take over that role unless there's a specific reason. And so I'm not for or against either way, just asking the question. But I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
And I think that that's why we spun off, for that same reason, because there was so many issues that the city really could not handle them. But I would say this, Brendan, if you haven't ever been, I'll take you there, you know, to different ones. And if you,
I've been to all of them.
You've been to all of them?
I have.
Okay. And some of them are just not the safest places, you know. But we have a lot of, there are a lot of duplication services, but I don't know if that's the right one. Maybe Habitat's the right one, because they're building left and right. I mean, I don't know. We'd have to look at have this conversation and look who's at the table and see what we want to do. But I just don't think going back to Topeka Housing Authority would be a good thing. I think we should kind of look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to be quicker. I know we're all getting ready for a break here.
Yes.
I do share, I appreciate Councilman Lesser bringing that up about the committee, because I'll be honest, I went through this and I missed the individuals that make up the committee, and right now, I'll just, for those of you who haven't read through this in the audience, I'm sure all you guys have, is the Deputy City Manager, the Director of Financial Services, the Director of Neighborhood Relations, the Director of Planning and Development, Deputy Director of Housing Services, Senior Grants Program Administrator, Kansas Housing Resource Corporation Rep, Federal Home Loan Bank Rep, and its Citizens Advisory Council Chairperson. And it's really not, I mean, these people that are named on here are great people and do a great job for the city, but, you know, I know I've met with Jump 3 or 4 times over the last, well, probably 3 years. And I mean, they're the ones who brought this up, and I don't see like any, for instance, any representation from them on here, and I'm wondering like, why are we not using the people who brought this to us?
They didn't want to serve.
Oh, okay, well, perhaps they didn't want to be on it, but I'm a little troubled that it's basically all like public officials that are on this, with the exception of one person that's a representative of a Citizens Advisory Council. So I would much rather see some, I guess, much more public, almost volunteer involvement outside of city government in this, frankly.
Wonderful. Yes, Councilwoman Heller.
I would point out that we ran through the same sort of thing in social service funding. When you put something that's as technical as affordable housing or social services out to people who are good people but are not familiar with running or managing those funds or providing those services, it ends up, they have a hard time being able to sort out those applications. I didn't make this list, but when I look at who the staff put on the list, it was the people that would have been called in professionally, with the exception of maybe the senior grant manager, who's kind of a new position there, who would have looked at it anyway, planning because of the zoning and the uses in the area, finance because it's our money, neighborhood relations and their housing people because they deal with the housing folks. It's the Federal Home Loan Bank and the Kansas Resource Corporation that are deciding on the tax credits. You know, Federal Home Loan Bank just gave us a $750,000 grant, if you think about it, to work on housing rehab. Those are the players that know that business. And I would let the city managers speak for themselves, I guess, but I think that that's why they put them on there. Again, if people want this kind of well-oiled machine that's simple, that doesn't involve, for instance, then conversely, recruiting people to serve on a board that never meets, and for which they've kind of got to get totally refreshed, if it does meet, is hard for the volunteer as well as for board management.
Councilman Emerson.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Councilwoman Hiller. And I know this is an area, I mean, you've forgotten more than I'll know about affordable housing, so I really appreciate that. My only question is, are these the people that would be deciding on individual projects? And I guess my trouble with that is, with no disrespect to anybody on the staff, I hopefully know my district a heck of a lot better than, you know, maybe Mr. Gerber or maybe Mrs. Hahn. And that, I guess that's kind of my issue. I wish there's more citizen representation on it.
If I could reply,
Councilwoman Hiller, yes.
And this was just me talking with city manager and the Jump folks and just trying to think it through. That's one of the reasons why I thought the final vote should come to the council. Because if that group knows it's coming to the council, if that puts a different dimension on the consideration and the recommendation, it would get the chance for public input at that time, if it's been well managed and well thought through. If you think about it, when the sort stuff comes through the empowerment grants, we generally vote them right on through, but everybody knows it's coming here.
Well, in a closing comment, I will say that we have to be very cautious when we say that when it comes to the council. I agree with Councilman Cohen on the fact that things typically get very politicized. And the best example of this is the fact that for years we have been trying to have a very methodical grant process in this city. And there has not been one simple grant allocation that the staff, the committee has worked on that hasn't been significantly lobbied by the community directly to the council members that they feel could change that vote. So if we're really going to talk about creating something that is depoliticized, maybe this is not the right place to have it. And I do agree that maybe having a council member on the committee, and this is something the city manager and I talked about, and ensuring that we have representation from the low-income community in this group so that it has a richness. In addition to the developer, a developer would bring something to the table, but I want to remind us that we have years of history of having a depoliticized process that is extremely political. So, with that being said, it is 8:30, and we are going to take a 10-minute recess.
A second.
I've been up since 4 a.m. I've been up since 4. We are calling the meeting to order again. Before we move on, I know that there is a intent for a motion to make a change to the agenda. I will recognize Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. In light of our heavy agenda, we've still got 5 action items left, and so I would make a motion that we move public comment ahead of the action items. I believe we've got 2 people signed up, and they're both here. That we can allow them 8 minutes to speak and move on with the night.
Do we have a second? Second. We have a second. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, let's give the clerk a second to, you're ready for the, okay, we proceed by voting.
We have 8 yes, Ms. Claire and Mr. Lesser voting no.
8 having voted yes, the motion passes. So we will move the public comment section to this portion of the agenda. The first person signed up to speak is Mr. Spencer Duncan.
I wasn't. Guy goes to the bathroom and look what happens. Hello, I'm Spencer Duncan. I'm here this evening in my capacity once again as the president of the board of the Topeka Performing Arts Center. As promised, to annoy you every once in a while with some information on what's going on over there. So I will get through it as quick as I can here so you can move on. Just for some background before I get these numbers, which actually makes them look a little better, is historically the first quarter for TPAC is its slowest. Just a slow time of year. It's winter. It's not as busy of a time as compared to summer and end of the year. Second and fourth quarters tend to be its biggest. But here are some numbers just from this past quarter. These are in no particular order. We've had almost 13,000 in attendance at events this year. We've brought in more than $50,000 in sponsorship and donations. Tim Allen in February was a sellout with more than 2,300 in attendance. We hosted more than 900 children and 100 parents and teachers last month at our Sheffield Theater Clinic, and that's a free clinic for those individuals. For the second consecutive year, we hosted the National Leap Dance Competition, which brought more than 600 dancers to Topeka. More than 1,000 people attended the Liverpool Legends concert. They had come back from the year before, but they did it almost for nothing as a fundraiser for TPAC. So that was very nice of them. We had nearly 1,000 children attend the PJ Masks Live event last month. We had more than 1,000 came to the Dwight Yoakam concert the other night, which actually was several hundred past what the promoter was hoping for. So that promoter left here very happy and ready to bring some more events back. And we were also home to 6 community events over the last couple months, including the Cyrus Hotel pre-opening staff event, It Takes a Village Praise Dance Opera, and the Radiant Dance Company Ballet. I don't know if our quarterly report's been submitted yet to the city. It was supposed to be today or tomorrow. We had one thing of financials to look over, but that will be submitted as we do every quarter to city staff for them to review, ask any questions, see the financials. But I know Larry, our executive director, told me it was supposed to be there this week if it hadn't been already. It just needed some reviews of the finances by corporate before we passed them on. Some upcoming events. They include Ballet Midwest has their spring ballet this weekend. Next week we host Stephen Fights, who it's a Welcome to the Jungle music tour. We're going to have a lot of kids in the building for that. We have For Sista Girls, which is a one-night theater event later this month. We have REO Speedwagon, the Beach Boys, both which are selling fast, so if you want tickets, go get them. We'll host the Brown v. Board Dance in Black and White event. And we've got 9 different dance companies who will be using TPAC in the next couple months for various things, plus Hayden High School graduation. We also announced this week that Kansas is coming in October, and I'm going to be that guy that everybody hates that tells you soon we will be announcing a very big comedy act, but I can't tell you who it is because the promoter won't let us yet. But they will be here in November, but it'll be a big act. Last couple things is on the business side. We are putting out a new RFP to have someone come do some strategic planning with the board and staff. We have added a new board member, Joan Wagnon, former mayor of Topeka. We are working on some new contracts for sponsorships that we think are going to pan out here pretty soon. And we are engaged with several individuals and companies about actual doing fundraising and capital campaign effort for the facility. So we'll kind of let you know how that goes. My last thing is, next Wednesday, April 17th, from noon to 1, anyone is invited to our Partners in Art Lunch, which we are doing over at TPAC. So anyone here, anyone listening, just call TPAC or let me know by Friday, and you are welcome to a free lunch for an hour over at the Performing Arts Center. With that, I'm out of here. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
Point of order. So this means I just go ahead and leave and don't comment on the other ones?
No, sir.
I mean, I don't care.
Then yes.
You know what? I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. I'm gonna do this. Okay. I still make.
4 minutes is up.
Yeah, and I'm on Pacific time, so I get a couple more hours. No, I wouldn't bore you. Okay, so here's how I'm gonna break this down. I'm just gonna take it in the orders that I was gonna speak. First on the City Hall. I've already put on the record my concerns about that. I just today finally got the age of the chillers, which is 1990, and one's older. They couldn't find the date. I think that's ridiculous that any citizen cannot get timely information out of staff. So if they told me that, I would have agreed, yeah, you probably should spend that $1.7 million on something that old and just get rid of it. But they didn't want to give me the answer. I looked at the exterior. I said, yeah, you know, I could see the $250,000 to keep the limestone from peeling off. There's some things like that that I wouldn't have opposition to. But to go beyond about $4 million on that building when you've only got 80 employees in there, and who knows, in 4 or 5 years you may be down to 50. I mean, these are changing times. We don't need the staffing we used to need for a lot of projects, especially in management and you know, secretarial positions. I'm not saying eliminate them. I'm just saying that there's no reason to hold on to all this space and keep remodeling it. One of my concerns with remodeling a building that old is you could get into a situation like the Capitol where you start opening up the walls and you're going, oh my God, now we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And so eventually you have a lot more costs than you ever anticipated. I think you could preserve the building, you know, the heating. The boilers got replaced in 2011. Did they give you that in their report? You know, some of these things have already been done. I would be very cautious about spending a lot of money on City Hall right now. You may be opening it up and spending a lot more money than you even dream of right now. And I think you need to be cautionary. You've already got a bridge that burned. That's got to be rebuilt. It's got to be repaired. You've got potholes that the city is constantly complaining about. I'm talking about the citizens, the businesses that live and work here. We don't have that fixed. I'm not convinced about the way we're fixing them, but I will tell you this, that's your front door. It's not City Hall. And if any part of City Hall is your front door, the people's side of this building, it's this side. This is where the people come. This is where the people talk to the governing body, not the offices. You know, sometimes we go over there, but it's it's minuscule, the amount of people that go over there compared to over here. Let me move on to the general CIP. I am very concerned that we, start putting more money into private contracting when it comes to repairing our streets. I think it's time to review that and make it happen. I'm not satisfied. Most people are not satisfied I talk to with the way the potholes and different things are being fixed. They want more supervision. They want upper management to be out actually watching how these people are doing their jobs. I wish you'd bring one of the county engineers over here that will tell you exactly how these things are fixed and how they stay fixed. It's not a difficult process. But the amount of money we're spending on streets is, I think, about $24 million now, and these streets should be looking a lot better. And I'm very dissatisfied with that, and I think that part of our CIP needs to address that. Now, I have already asked that California be at least 2021. I know you've got it 2022. Certainly, we have a opportunity potentially with the KTA and
Mr. Ledbetter, would you like an extension?
I thought I got 8 minutes and then I'm done. Wasn't that the motion?
It's 4 minutes.
It
Oh.
was Spencer plus him, and he misunderstood. He was going to get an advance on all of this speaking.
Okay.
I thought you.
No, so we
Point
said.
of order. I really did. I thought that's what you said.
No, sir, it was 8 minutes because of you and Mr.
Well,
Duncan, but we're happy to.
I'm willing to live up to my end of the deal. If you want to, give me 2 minutes. I'll try to wrap this up.
2-minute extension?
We have a motion and a second. We proceed with the voting.
That's what I got excited about. I said, I'm just going to leave. Okay. Think of it. It's like a twofer. You get rid of me that much quicker, I don't think I'm going to be able to dive into what I found out about the traffic lights and how you can save a lot of money on that. I wish I had time. I will tell you that we installed a lot of equipment in 2017, which I had no idea of until I started asking a lot of questions last year. And I was told by some people that with a $200,000 program, we can probably synchronize all the lights in the city from one office. And that all the traffic lights now have this new equipment since 2017. And I don't know how much of this actually gets out to the council. I think you just got to ask questions. I've got an email from Nikki last year telling me that. But this $200,000 software package is called Syntrax, and that allows these things to be timed from an office, from a central office. You still have to have somebody do the count, the traffic counts, to synchronize the lights. But they've already just manually resynchronized South Topeka, and they also did, I think it was 470 to Wanamaker recently. And these are some of the places I've been complaining about for several years. And if we would just get these traffic lights synchronized once and for all, I think our citizenry would be more productive, our staff would be more productive, delivery services would be more productive. We'd save a huge amount of man hours and cost. People waiting in red lights. And it's those kinds of things that I wish our staff would think about how to solve it and actually ask the tough questions of other staff and get the answers instead of the citizens have to do it. Not that I mind, it's just that some of these things should have been solved 5 and 6 years ago. And so thank you for your time, and you all have a good evening discussing these budgets, okay? All right, bye.
Thank you, Mr. Ledbetter. That being said, we now enter the action items. Item A, if the clerk would read.
A is an ordinance concerning electric-assisted scooters, amending Topeka Municipal Code, Chapter 10.35.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, tonight you have before you the changes that were made in the ordinance based on the discussion that we had when this item was brought before you in the past. The changes are noted on the second page of the cover letter for this agenda item, and the staff stands for any questions you may have regarding this.
Questions for city manager and for the staff? Councilman Jensen.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval. Do we have a second for purposes of discussion? Second by Councilmember Cohen. Now we have discussion. Councilwoman Heller.
I have two short amendments. It looks longer than it is. I sent this out to the bicycle folks who are always reading these things carefully. You could send these around. And so I can wait till you get them, but they're just two short ones. On page 4, on line 78, if we could, the way that it's a matter of just changing the phrasing. The intent of the phrasing appears to be that you cannot ride a scooter on the street where the speed limit is 35 miles an hour or greater, unless there's a bike lane. What this doesn't say is that if you're going to be on it, you need to be in the bike lane. So I just suggest a small change to that would say, operate an electric assisted scooter on a street with a speed limit of 35 miles per hour or more, unless the scooter is traveling in a marked bike lane. It's pretty straightforward. On page 5, and staff can help if we misunderstood the intent, but it appears that what they're trying to do with a lot of the stuff in the middle of the page is make sure that people don't just put their scooters in some place that would block access to getting to parking spaces, bike racks, and so on. The language that is in there right now says that that scooters cannot park in bike racks or the transit bike racks, nor can they block access to them. The consensus that I got with the feedback was it was fine for people to park their scooters tie up at a bike rack or in the metro bike racks. They just shouldn't block them. So this amendment is simply to make a number 4 that would say it's unlawful to park in a manner that would impede access to the bike racks, this same language, that simply would remove then the making it illegal to park in one of them.
Councilman Jensen.
So, question for anybody, do we limit bikes on streets where the speed limit is 35 miles an hour now? And I guess I'm...
Not bicycles.
So why scooters and not bicycles?
Councilwoman Heller. City manager.
Or whoever.
Well, I think relative to, in this particular case, the limiting the scooters to these routes under 35 just because of their capabilities is what we were looking at.
A bike can't go 35 miles an hour either. A bike's, you'll be lucky you're going the same speed as an electric scooter.
Right.
So I guess I'm not understanding this particular change then.
The best thing I could figure out, because I had the same question, understand that this limits people on electric scooters from not ever going over 15 miles an hour anyway. So there's not, I misread it at first and thought they were going to go 35 miles an hour, which they're not. A bicycle is up higher. You would be more, bicycles can be on any street. You're more likely to see somebody perhaps on a bike than somebody who's standing down at ground level on a scooter. And plus, with the cars going so fast and the scooters right there, that's the only thing I could figure out.
Councilman Jensen.
With respect, there's not that much of a difference, and I'm a fairly avid bike rider with a speedometer, and most often you're 10, 12 miles an hour, and inconsistently at that. So
I'm sure it wasn't the speed. I just figured maybe they thought you couldn't see people.
I mean, you're on a scooter, you're standing up, you're nearly as tall as you are on a bike because you're hunched over on a bike. So yeah, I don't know that I could support that. The second one makes sense to me, but I mean, I would need more clarification to understand the first one before I'd be willing to support it, I guess.
Councilman Lesser, to be followed by Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One of the many problems I have with this ordinance is there's just so much so much of the language that's unenforceable or puts a burden to a certain extent on our law enforcement officers. I mean, I don't know if we're going to be taking 15-mile-an-hour radar on scooters somewhere. I don't know how that becomes enforceable. Travel at a speed that is reasonable and prudent. That there again, that's in the eyes of whoever's right. I don't know how that gets enforced. One of the areas, public sidewalks in the downtown in the area of Jackson to Quincy, 4th to 11th. Quite frankly, that was one of the areas where I thought was the most important area that we would be utilizing this for people downtown, from the plaza to the restaurants to all those different things. And we're going to be forcing them then to be on the streets, which down there, people backing out, that's just not the best place to be doing that. Yet at the same time, we're saying that you can ride on the sidewalks at Washburn, you can ride on this, it's just, there's just a lot of, I think it's well-intentioned. I just have lots of issues with this in regards to enforceability, as well as the fact the core of where I see the most utilization of it is eliminated from usage. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments or questions? Councilman Emerson.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Councilman Lesser pretty much already kind of summed up my comments, just better than I would have said them. So thank you for that. But the same thing. When I've traveled to cities, it seems like in big cities, this is mainly in the urban core where people are really using these. They're on the corners, and in Austin a couple months ago, and they were all over the place in their busiest downtown district, and I share the same concerns.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I actually reached out to a couple of companies to ask about some of these issues, and the consensus I got from talking with a couple of these folks was that their general intent is to move them away from the core, so the urban neighborhood. So their idea is they primarily want these stationed between bus stops and residences, or to actually have folks use them to get to work on the side streets. Their intent with their staff is that they not be generally used in the downtown area. Just, for one, we don't permit that. I also asked about the capabilities of the educational component, about where people can ride them, how they can ride them, and indeed, Mr. Fire did indicate that there's a huge chunk of that in the operating agreement that they have with some of these vendors. Additionally, they actually have the ability, using the GPS trackers in their rentable scooters, they'll send them a text message and say, hey, you're in a scooter-controlled environment, this is where you can ride it, this is where you can't. So they have the ability to use ongoing training to help maintain that. The biggest thing out of all of this is we keep pushing for options to get people to work, and a lot of those rely on very heavy government subsidies. This is one of the first ones that's come to our community and said, we don't need your money at all. We'll put this stuff here, we'll manage this stuff, we'll police this stuff to some degree. We just need you to say okay. So from that perspective, I think, baby steps here. This is brand new for our community, but I think it's definitely something that we should at least approve for a trial run and see how it works. I mean, we're literally not spending any money to do something that's just another option for people to get to work, to get to school, to get to church, in an environment where people need it. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Well, I will, in response to Councilman Lesser, we went through the whole debate about bicycles on sidewalks and decided that we didn't want them on the sidewalk for a variety of reasons that I don't think we need to probably want to go back to at this point.
we still need to do education even for the bicycles, and one of the things that you can do with a bicycle, or if it's scooters, if we have those, is simply take the lane, get out in the middle. We put the sharrows down the middle of the lanes downtown to help kind of non-verbally make it clear that you don't have to be right up next to where somebody's going to back into you, or you're going to run into somebody who's backing out. You can just take the lane. So hopefully we can resolve that one by practice and by some education. Back to the two I had said a little differently. The first one is just to change the language. It's clear that, or it appeared clear that they just didn't want the scooters in the lanes with cars if the speed limit was 35 miles an hour or higher. And so the change in language was only to clarify that, because the way it was written looked like, well, as long as there was a bike lane, you could be anywhere. And I don't think that was the intent. So with that, should I move one amendment at a time? Okay. I would move that we change line 78 to clarify it as written.
Do we have a second? Councilman Jensen. We have a second by Councilman Jensen. Additional discussion on this first amendment. Councilman Emerson.
Councilwoman Hiller, so the entire thing would just be, or would you add to this or take away from this?
It's a substitution.
You take out the 35 miles an hour?
No, only what's there. The 35 miles an hour is there to say they don't want the scooters in traffic with any motor vehicles that are going 35, where the speed limit is 35 hours or more, or 35 miles an hour or more. That's the intent that I read in that line. Right. The problem is it says, unless there's a bike lane, it doesn't say they're supposed to be in the bike lane if they're going to be on that street. So this is a substitution just to clarify that wherever it's over 35 miles an hour, they're either not going to be on it at all, or in a bike lane if there is one that's marked.
I think I understand, but would you mind just reading one then with your substitution in, just so we all are clear, please? If you have that. Sure. Or if I have it here too, if you want.
You can read it.
Okay. So you wanted to say operate an electric assisted scooter on a street with a speed limit of 35 miles per hour or more, unless the scooter is traveling in a marked blue lane.
Correct.
Okay.
Because the beginning of that says it's prohibited.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Additional questions and clarifications for this amendment? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes, Ms. Claire voting no.
9 having voted yes, the amendment passes. We now move on to the second amendment. Councilwoman Hiller?
The second one, I would move that we change on page 5, as is noted on the page. Again, the idea there is to make a new number 4 and say that it is illegal, unlawful for someone with an electric scooter to park it in a manner that would impede access to bike racks, including Topeka Metro Transit Authority bike share stations. That causes a change in numbering. That what I would do, though, is eliminate number 7, where the language says that they can't park in the bike racks. So it's just to clean it up. What number 7 says is they cannot park in or in a manner that would impede access to or the use of any of the following. Number 7 says bike racks, including Topeka Metro. So what that means is they can't park in them or near them and block them. So the switch is just to say you can't block them. Does that make more sense? And the rest of the changes are just the cascades that changing the numbers does.
Is that in the form of a motion?
It is.
Do we have a second for discussion?
Second.
Okay, we have a second by Councilman Emerson. Councilman Emerson, you have a question.
Yes, Councilwoman Hiller, just, so you're deleting, specifically you're deleting 117 and 118 lines?
Oh, well, the version I have is 118 and 119.
That's 117,
All right.
Okay, thank you.
But then you'd be inserting up at line 109 or 10. Why do I have a different version?
Councilman Jensen.
I'm assuming you've reached out to the Metro folks to verify that they're okay. with
Andy
that.
Fry and Carl Fundenberger were the two of the people that commented.
Good enough. I would also note that the Metro Authority doesn't necessarily own all of their bike racks, the ones that are
Understand that.
approved. So, but, you know, if we're going to try and
But they
encourage-
said it was fine with them to have electric scooters parked in their bike racks.
Well, I agree. I mean, if we're going to try and encourage people to park in a consistent standard place,
Right.
what better thing to use than the bike rack network we already have?
Right.
So, thank you.
Okay. Additional clarifications on this item? We are about to make a vote on a second amendment to this ordinance.
Thanks.
If there is, we have a motion and a second. At this point in time, we proceed by voting.
Thank you.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. At this point in time, what we have in front of us,
That was a home rule.
that was a home rule?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't vote. I don't vote for home rule.
Oh.
We need to vote again.
It's a ordinary ordinance.
Okay.
We're voting again on the same amendment. I don't vote.
On the first one, too.
On an ordinary?
It's ordinary ordinances.
Was that the second amendment?
Mm-hmm. Change about a first one, too. Ms. Hiller? We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the second amendment passes. At this point in time, what we have,
Redo the first one.
To redo the first one as well.
oh, we have to redo the first one as well. I am so sorry.
I thought it was fancy ordinance.
So do we still, is it okay if we still have the first motion and the second by the individuals that made it?
Yep.
Okay, so at this point in time, we are re-voting so that I keep my hands away from the voting machines for the first amendment that we had.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. At this point in time, what we have is the full ordinance with the 2 amendments that have been passed. And there already has been a motion and a second, and I have a person signed up that would be interested in speaking. Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd also like to offer an amendment on this. On lines 53 and 54, the prohibition on the public sidewalks and pocket parks. Currently, the area is from 4th to 11th and from Jackson to Quincy. I'd like to change that to Kansas Avenue from 6th to 10th.
Do we have a second for that amendment?
Sure, second.
We have a second by Councilman Lesser. At this point, we're open for discussion. Councilman Jensen.
Thank you. I'm just curious as to why. We already have an existing area that's set aside for pedestrians.
Councilman Mays.
If I may, I feel like probably just knowing the makeup of the downtown area, I feel like Kansas Avenue is a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. It's probably pretty safe for them to be out in the street. I know people go quite a bit faster on Jackson and Quincy. I know there's also a lot less pedestrians on both of those streets, so I feel like it'd probably be a little safer for them to be on the sidewalk than in the street. And I feel like if we're worried about them running over pedestrians or the like, I think that's kind of the concern here, is we want them off the sidewalk, and Kansas Avenue is really where the pedestrians are. I mean, I work on Jackson. I rarely see anyone walking on Jackson. So that's why.
Councilwoman Hillard.
A lot of the other language here syncs up and says that they need to follow the same rules as bicycles. And I would think, our police do the best that they can sifting through all these different variances in regulations that we have. If I would think that we should sync up whatever the prohibitions and allowances are for bicycles with scooters, that they should be the same, and that if we're going to consider changing them, we should probably change them both so that they match. For enforcement purposes, I think they should match. And they do with this ordinance, I think, the way it's proposed.
Got a comment? No. Deputy Mayor.
I remember we spent three meetings on this, and we had people come up and heard from people from downtown. And so I think right now this needs to stay, because we just did that, a year ago, maybe? Maybe two. But that would be my reason. We did discuss this for a long time. Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Councilman Emerson. Would you mind restating your motion, please?
yeah, the motion was to change lines 53 and 54 to Kansas Avenue from 6th Street to 10th Street.
Councilwoman Hiller?
I can refresh, because you're new to the council since that happened. One of the reasons it passed, some of that discussion, the lengthy discussion that you talked about, was because the worst accidents and the most frequent ones happen when people are crossing alleys or driveways. And so there were some pretty bad horror stories of people at like the alley between Jackson and Kansas Avenue, having somebody come zipping by on the sidewalk when they were coming down the alley, and either near misses and so on. As I recall, that was part of why people eventually agreed to go out a full block, if that's helpful for background.
Okay, sorry.
Councilman Mays.
I guess also, I sort of envision, when I look at Kansas Avenue right now, it seems as primarily the developments between 6th and 10th right now, that if we really want to bridge this gap between Kansas Avenue and Noto, I think it'd be real easy for somebody to hop on one of these at 6th Street and take the sidewalk over the bridge. Just where I'm coming from on this. I'm not sure what it's clear there's a couple people that don't like the idea. I feel like maybe at this point I'll just, I was considering withdrawing the motion, but I think I'd rather we just vote on it and see. So.
Councilman Lesser.
Well, I think part of the reasons of the alleys and stuff is ridiculous. I mean, there's blind spots everywhere. There's blind spots in alleys in central Topeka. There's blind spots in alleys in downtown Topeka. I was riding my bike by Herman's the other day, coming out behind it, and a car came. If that's really our concern, then we just need to not have them. If that's our concern. If not, then there's an assumption of risk. If you want to ride one of these, you have to be careful. You take that assumption, you move on.
So at this point in time, we would proceed to vote on the amendment that Councilman Mays has provided, changing the language to include Jackson, to be removing Jackson and just keeping it from 6th to 10th Street on Kansas Avenue.
Right.
Okay, the mayor does not vote on this one. We proceed by voting.
We have 6 yes, Hiller, Clear, and Jensen voting no.
6 having voting yes, the amendment passes. So now we have in front of us the document with the 3 amendments that have been presented for your vote. We have a motion, we have a second, and I am seeing if there's any further discussion on the item as amended, and seeing none. Councilman Lesser?
Just housekeeping items, number 6970 contradicts itself. It says operators must be at least 16 years of age and possess a valid driver's license. A driver's license is not required, so.
Boy, good catch.
I read it before.
On the clean
69 and 70.
Councilman Emerson?
Mine reads different than that. It says operators must be at least 16 years of age, and then a driver's license is not required. Is yours different than that?
Yeah, the red line one doesn't have it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's updated in the clean version. Huh? In the clean version, it's updated the most recent.
City Attorney? On the most updated version, is that corrected?
Yes, it says, there's the footer at the bottom of what you should have is ordinance electric assisted scooter 4919 governing body action.
You have the older version, the other version.
There was a third version with green highlight.
Thank you very much.
That Brenda sent out last week.
So your concern has been taken care of?
Oh, I'm sorry. So it says in line 69, subsection A, operators must be at least 16 years of age, period. A driver's license is not required, period.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So at this point, we proceed by voting. I don't vote.
Okay, Mr. Lesser? Mr. Lesser? All right, we have 7 yes, council members Clear and Ortiz voting no.
7 having voted affirmatively, the motion passes. We now move on to item B.
If I could make a motion to defer the next 3 items, or next 4 items to our next meeting. I know we have a 30-minute executive session, and it's now nearly 9:30. So in order to be out by 10, according to our ordinance, we would need to move to that executive session.
So we have a motion and we have a second. At this point, we're open for discussion with regards to the, Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. City Manager, are there anything on here that's time sensitive that we need to address tonight?
As far as the amendments to the CIP and those particular items that we have, we had set a target of next week, the 16th, as being our point that we would like to see the amendments to the budget approved. So for us, that is the point that, our target date was. So there isn't anything that would necessarily be directly affected other than we're still on hold related to these items. Do you have anything further?
City Hall's on hold.
Yeah, and that is basically it. These projects are on, the City Hall project and other projects would be on hold for another week before we would be able to take any steps further. So that's the only, the only impact related to putting these on hold for another week.
Deputy Mayor?
At the beginning of the meeting, you were going to decide around this time if we were having an executive
Correct.
session. Yes,
Yeah.
are we?
Well, that would be up to you to decide whether or not you wanted to do the executive session versus pursue these items. That would be, what I looked at was if we were doing these, that we would postpone the executive session, and we would need to schedule that.
Right.
So it'd be your choice in either or. But like you say, with 4 items, I understand it is, and we've been trying to scale the agenda down, but there are a lot of items going on right now, and very good discussions tonight, so I don't fault that. It has been a good meeting in that respect.
I would vote to move on. We've been discussing these forever. If we can move on these and do the executive session later. Let's, get through at least one or two of them maybe before 10.
I know there's some, Councilwoman Ortiz, Hiller.
I support that motion. It's taken some time this week, but I know that the city manager and the finance director have offered to, just now, yesterday, offered to sit down and have a session that I've been waiting for some questions answered and some, so that we can get done within the next week, I'm sure.
Okay. The only concern that I have is that we have individuals that have been here waiting.
No, ma'am, it's just Mr. Ledbetter. He's already spoken.
No, I'm talking about the individuals for the item of the building.
Comment?
No.
Oh, the engineers.
But at this point in time, if there's no other questions, I guess we would. Councilman Padilla?
No,
Oh.
I'm just doing a lesser.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, this is like a lesser group right there. Okay, so at this point in time, we proceed by voting. We're voting on bypassing the next 4 items onto the next meeting.
And an executive session.
And holding the executive session. Councilman Lesser.
I would, I don't know if it is appropriate or not, but I would also offer an amendment for next week that could we start earlier so we can knock some of this stuff out. Part of the reason is, it goes for a variety of different reasons, but a number of these things have been picked back because we've been waiting on additional information. So we kick it to the next meeting, then we kick it to the next meeting. I understand. So I don't know if that's feasible or if that creates other issues as well, but I'm happy to show up earlier if we need to.
Would you like to add that to this motion as a friendly amendment?
That would be fine.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, I'd accept it.
Okay. 5 o'clock? Okay. So the motion that we have in front of us is moving the next items in the agenda to next week and having a start to the meeting at 5 o'clock rather than 6 o'clock. Just want to make sure that everybody knows what's happening here. Okay.
Who was the second one?
Second,
Okay.
it was Lesser? Okay. All right. Everybody clear on what we're voting on? Okay. Proceed by voting.
Okay.
Question.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
He approved it, or the motion was from,
Councilman Jensen.
I seconded.
Oh.
And then Lester comes through with the,
Friendly amendment.
who seconded that?
I accept it.
He accepted
Okay,
it.
all right. No, I didn't.
Okay.
I will accept a friendly amendment, but this is gonna be tough, because one I want and one I don't.
Okay. Additional comments or questions? Councilwoman Ortiz.
I'm gonna support this, but I don't know what my calendar looks like next Tuesday, so I can't guarantee that I'm gonna be here at 5. So that's kind of tough, but.
Okay. I think we now proceed by voting.
You can vote on this one, I think.
Okay, we have 7 yes, Mayor DeLisa abstained, and Councilmember Clear and Mays voted no.
7 having voting yes, the motion passes. All these items are deferred to next week with a start of the meeting at 5 o'clock. That being said, there is no public comment. We now move on to the portion of the agenda of the announcements.
Okay, on the April 16th agenda, we just moved the 4 items that we discussed, and then consent agenda, it looks like we have 3 special event ordinances. We have a couple noise exceptions, an expenditure ordinance for March. We have the public hearing and ordinance for Sherwood Crossing CID, and the public hearing and ordinance for the Southwest 17th and Wanamaker CID. Discussions include filing and disposition of tort claims ordinance, City of Topeka Personnel Code regarding the employee residency requirement, and then discussion on governing body goals and priorities update.
City Manager.
Yes, in light of the decision to defer these and all the items that she just mentioned, we'll have to do some changing in the agenda. So don't count on each one of those items coming back at this meeting. We'll do the best we can to pare it down. We'll put these budget items up front and get them done as quickly as we can so that we can get decisions so that we can move forward. So other than that, I have no other additional announcements.
Councilwoman Clear?
I'm still making rules up on the fly bother me. I don't have any announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilwoman Ortiz?
How soon will we get the agenda?
The agenda will be available on Thursday.
So we know what to
At the end of the
look
day.
forward to?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Emerson, Councilman Padilla, Councilman Jensen.
My only comment is today is Hunter's 2-month birthday. Happy birthday, son.
Councilman Mays, Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to remind everybody that tonight at midnight is the deadline for voting for the Topeka flag. So no matter where you stand on, if you like one more than the other, you need to vote on that tonight before midnight.
Councilman Lesser.
I just want to tell my son Dylan that I am proud of him. His birthday is coming up, and he did a Fund Me deal in honor of his grandfather for multiple myeloma. So he wanted that instead of gifts, and so much less selfish than I was at 18 years old, and so I'm very proud.
Councilwoman Heller. Okay, seeing no further comments at this point in time, we have to recess into an executive session. Councilwoman Ortiz?
The time is 9:34. I'd like to make a motion. We extend the meeting
Past 10 o'clock.
past 10 o'clock.
Second.
Until we're done.
We have a motion and we have a second. Discussion, seeing none, we proceed by voting to extend the meeting past 10.
We have 9 yes, Ms. Claire voting no.
9 having voting yes, that motion passes. City Attorney, if you could please read the parameters.
The motion is to recess into executive session for a period of time not to exceed 30 minutes to discuss confidential employment matters pertaining to non-elected personnel as justified by KSA 75-4319B1 in order to protect the privacy of those discussed. To aid the discussion, the following individuals should be present: members of the governing body, City Manager Brent Trout, Deputy City Manager Doug Gerber, Administrative and Financial Services Director Jessica Lamandola, Human Resources Director Jackie Russell, Senior Assistant City Attorney Catherine Walter, and myself. No action will be taken when open meeting resumes in the governing body chambers.
We have heard the parameters of the executive session. What is the pleasure of the body? We see a motion by Councilman Jensen, second by Councilman Emerson. Seeing no further comment, we proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We will clear out the room to begin with our executive session. The executive session has concluded. There has been no action taken at this point in time. The whole meeting is adjourned.